So we'll get started. Our first item is under executive limitations, and it's a monitoring report that, in a way that Patrick has some information to provide for us. So the first one is update, and it's around support from the district management group and the transportation consultant. So Patrick.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So after the last board meeting, I did some reaching out to some consultants for more information. There are a couple of things that have surfaced. Most notably, last meeting, there was an interest from the board in getting sort of an outsider expert perspective on sort of a combination of things is how I was reading the conversation. One being to weigh in on my recommendation, but another might be to consider suggesting alternatives as well. So I was thinking about what kind of support I could pursue just to see what's out there and who's available to help provide that kind of information to the board. So I thought I would go right to the best source I could think of as I consider the work we've relied upon to make some decisions in MAUSD, but it's also work that was relied upon at the state level to inform some decisions and informs decisions going forward, thinking about Act 173, et cetera. And so that was the district management group. I had done some work with Nate Levinson in the past. Nate Levinson is the sort of leader of the district management group. I don't know what his official title is, but I reached out to Nate. We had a great conversation about what kind of support district management group could offer. And Nate said this is something they have a lot of experience with. They've worked with multiple districts around New England, but beyond, looking at really the same struggle that we find ourselves in with declining enrollment, increasing expenses, sort of additional space in schools, et cetera. And he kind of walked me through two different options that they've done in the past. And I didn't think really either option fit us, so I asked for kind of a middle option. The two options he walked me through were a sort of, if we had engaged them from day one, prior to community engagement and all the work that's happened so far, that sort of soup to nuts kind of support is something they provide to some districts. He also mentioned a much more kind of cursory review of our situation. And of course, those two options came with dramatically different price tags. And I asked him to think about kind of a middle option, because I didn't feel like a brief overview of what we've done, as those are my words, really was going to satisfy the board's interest. And I also didn't think a soup to nuts, starting from ground zero, engaging with constituents, et cetera, was necessarily required either. So Nate is working on that. I expect to hear something from him, I think end of this week or into the early part of next week, about what kind of support he thinks might make sense given our situation. I've shared with him a bunch of different documents, and including the recommendation that I made and the supporting documents there, the community values that we've created. So just to try and give him some context as he's trying to work up an option for us to consider. So I can share more on that in the future, but I wanted to let you know I've been doing some homework on that end. Maybe I can take any questions around that now before I talk about the transportation.
Looks like Steve Rooney. Let me see his hand.
What was the high and the low range there, Patrick?
So the high end was about $100,000 and the low end was about $10,000. So I'm guesstimating our sort of middle of the road is going to be in the $50,000 range.
Dave?
Me, yes.
Yeah.
I didn't yet have my hand up. I just unmuted. My perspective on this is growing, and I am very concerned about taking the overwhelming amount of resources out of elementary education, and few resources out of middle and high school. So this leads me to think about even more strongly the notion that we should do something around middle and high school first. And I wondered if that was part of your discussion with Nate.
Yeah, that specific concept didn't come up. It was about a 30-minute conversation, so we didn't really get into the depths of it in that conversation.
Rob, was that your hand? Oh,
Sorry, yeah, attempting. So like what, I guess if we were to go forward with the middle of the road proposal, like what exactly would they be, I guess, looking at, like alternative proposals, or would they be looking more directly at your proposal, Patrick? I guess I think it'd be great if we had some outside help, but I'm just curious what they'd be helping us with.
Yeah, it would be both. Based on the conversation I had with Nate, they would be looking critically at the recommendation I made, including financial analysis, as well as the programmatic analysis, and coming up with a small number of other options. You know, didn't want to pin it down to specific, but 2 or 3 was the sense I was getting as alternatives for consideration.
Krista.
Yeah, so Patrick, maybe it's too soon to ask this question, but I was just wondering what input we might have in terms of what options they could present back to us. And I guess another part of that question is, would we have the chance to connect with Nate before, to meet with him before he went off and did his work?
Yeah, I would say all of that is still to be determined. My sense is Nate would want to connect with the board to understand at a deeper level what work has happened to date, and to understand where he can kind of pick it up and move forward with it. And I think in that conversation would be an opportunity to share some thoughts on possible alternative scenarios. And I think I think that's something for the board to think about, is to what extent does the board want to choose the alternative scenarios, and to what extent does the board want to rely on the expertise of this outside support to produce some viable alternatives? Because they'll study anything we ask them to study for a fee, whether it ends up being a good idea or not. If we let them have some latitude to offer suggestions of things that would be good ideas, we may get more bang for our buck in terms of capitalizing on their expertise.
Krista, again.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think that makes good sense, that if we have the chance to help shape what we would, not direct what we want, but if we're going to pay for some consultancy to make sure that it's addressing our most pressing questions or issues as much as we could without completely directing their process, I think that would be important.
Okay. And Liz?
I think that's all I would add, is just that I want to make sure that they're aware of what our biggest challenges are, and that we would be able to communicate to them about that. Thank you. Oops.
I'm not seeing any more hands, but everybody's scattered, so I have to keep looking. Oh, Kristen Blanchett.
Yep, sorry, I was running home from work, so I missed the, you're going to get a consultant to help us figure things out. Is that what you said, Patrick?
Yeah, I reached out to Nate Levinson, who's the leader of the district management group, DMG, who did the report for the state, and whose work we've leaned on a lot in some decisions we've made here in MAUSD. And Nate's working up a sort of proposal for a way that they could support us, both sort of a combination of reviewing critically the recommendation I made, including financial analysis, and considering alternatives to my recommendation.
Thank you. That sounds like a good idea, and we've got time, right? So, yeah.
I did mention to Nate our timeline. Like I mentioned that the board was interested in having some sense by its August retreat what direction it would like to go in, and Nate felt like that window of time was reasonable for the work that we were talking about.
Great.
Andrew.
I was just to add that I'm also excited to have this outside group give us some perspective and maybe offer some alternatives to your proposal, Patrick. Just, I think because right now we have your proposal, and I know there's some folks in the community who might have some other ideas, but I'm really most interested in proposals from folks who thoroughly understand educational systems and the pressures that we're dealing with. Also, because if we hear some alternatives that maybe the mechanics look different, but essentially it comes down to the same outcomes of the way we need to reorganize, or there's recommendations for school closures or things like that, that it isn't just the board and it isn't just the superintendent, but we have, again, more expert folks who provide a similar analysis, if that's what it turns out to be.
Sarah McLean.
Yeah, I guess I just would like a better understanding of what exactly we're looking for. So we had the NASDAQ report, and we've used that for your recommendation. And I guess I'm a little confused and unclear of what we're looking to get from a consulting firm. And I guess I'm just worried that we're just kind of going around and around and around, and it's expensive and it's time consuming, and it focuses. Well, I know we need to focus somewhere to find solutions, but I guess I'm just confused of how we land at a certain on a certain consultant. I've never heard of these people, so I trust that you've seen their work before, and I'll look into them after this meeting. Yeah, I guess I'm just a bit confused of this idea and the timeline, and will that drive the train for the board going forward and coming up with something for the August retreat, or is it a supplemental resource, or what are we thinking as far as the role that it will play in the process the board is hoping to come up with on this pretty brisk timeline?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would turn that back to the board to answer that question, because it was really generated from the last board meeting where there was a lot of interest from board members in getting outside consultant expert opinion on my recommendation and on alternatives. And this was an attempt on my part to begin the process of securing someone to provide that.
Caleb.
Thank you. Yeah, the DMG group I've had a little experience with, and certainly they heard from them at the state level about Act 173 implementation, and they have seems great track record and connection to that whole area. So that seems great. The question that I'm really interested in getting professional, kind of analysis with is about, and I know we're hearing from Patrick later on this, and not to suggest there has not been analysis, but on not operating 9 through 12, not operating K through 8, just because it sort of feels like you've got elementary consolidation at one end of a spectrum and maybe high school consolidation, or not operating 9 through 12 at the other end of a spectrum. And for me, it would be helpful to sort of bookend that. And that's I know I don't want to get ahead of Patrick's proposal, but I think I can say that it's a complicated thing to look at just from our district's level. And I think that a statewide consultant could be really helpful to sort of say, geographically, who are the other high schools around us? what is the capacity at those schools to take us? If a percentage of our students geographically went to certain high schools, how would that affect their finances? Would that be beneficial to those schools? Long term, how many excellent high schools can Vermont support, and how many do we have now? So Dave's talked about this a little bit. I think sometimes we need. Dave talked more about getting sort of testimony that we wouldn't really be paying for, in terms of witnesses in and kind of getting more information. But this would be a paid consultant, and I think there is an opportunity there for having that context and crunching some complicated numbers, because it's dynamic, right? It's like what we do kind of has a ripple effect to surrounding districts, depending on what we do. So anyway, that's long-winded, but basically an endorsement of DMG is, I think probably a good place to spend that money, but I would want to have the opportunity to get them a list of priority questions, not just my own, but the whole board, obviously, and just make sure that they think they have those specific capabilities as well as, their broader expertise to really answer those focused questions.
Krista.
Patrick, I think you said they would have something back to you soon. Are you imagining that our next special meeting facilities meeting would be when we would get a chance to look at that proposal and then decide if we want to, invite them to come talk with us, or what's next, I guess, is what I'm wondering.
Yeah, I expect I'll get a proposal from DMG within the week, probably by early next week is what I'm assuming. I suppose it could stretch into the middle of next week, but the timeline that Nate gave me was end of this week or early next. So yeah, I would think I'd have something more to share at the next meeting, and that could be on the 23rd, or it could be on, I think March 9th is the next special meeting.
Dave?
Let me unmute here. So would it be a reasonable step to take for each of us to submit questions to the chair that we would seek to have answered either by the Nate Levinson group or otherwise as we move towards a decision?
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure if that question is directed toward me or if that's more toward Don. I would think something like what we've done in the past, rather than sort of a laundry list of any question that any individual board member has. Again, this is especially if we're talking about a consultant tracking down answers to all of these questions, we're going to start racking up the dollars pretty quickly. I think if there are questions in particular that we want to have, want to invest money in finding answers to, then they should be questions that the board as a whole are interested in getting answers to.
So if I might respond, so yes, so I was thinking, so step one is we elicit questions from each board member, goes to the chair, and then step two is those questions are distributed amongst board members, and then step three is that we have a meeting or some process where we winnow those down to whatever half dozen questions that climb to the top of the list for Mr. Levinson or any other person or group that we choose to have give us input addresses. I'm trying to get away from the comment that Sarah made about, chasing our tail and just running around in circles. And as we try to get to a conclusion, trying to chart a pathway to get there.
So that very idea of the questions is kind of what's going to happen a little later as we look at some of the questions that individual board members have sent. So I think we're going to try it out at today's meeting around some questions, see how it works, and then maybe we can refine a process, or if we need to get information to this group. I'm not seeing any more hands, Patrick.
Okay, I can talk about the transportation. So a similar conversation with a transportation consultant, a guy by the name of Tim Ammon from the Decision Support Group. So this is the company that's working with Addison Central right now to do their transportation study and their sort of facilities master planning. Floyd and I had a great conversation with Tim, very well poised to support us. Looking for this analysis, it's really looking more carefully at my recommendation and getting a finer level of detail around the transportation. There have been some transportation questions that have surfaced through the board requests of information from me. So to get that level of analysis, it's going to take this kind of support. So Tim is also working on a proposal to respond to both phase 1 and phase 2 of my recommendation, and helping understand more about the transportation related factors with that. And we expect something from him in about that same time frame, end of this week, early next week. So I should have information on that at our next meeting as well. And that'll really get us driving down to how much time kids would spend on a bus, what the cost implications would be. And I made sure to share with him the interest is keeping kids on a bus to a similar extent as they are now, so that we're not really changing that factor, and wanting to understand what kind of bus routes and how many buses, et cetera, it would take to be able to achieve that. So that's also underway, and I can share more information later.
Liz?
I'm really interested to hear more about that. I spent a while going around Google Maps, and it only gets me so far, of course. But the small things is a part of that. Does that ever consider, for instance, a van that would maybe just pick up a handful of kids and do a more direct route, or is it all with the big yellow buses? I mean, like, do they consider a little bit more, like, what does the flexibility look like with that?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure, but I think they're well practiced at looking for efficiencies, and if that means a smaller bus or a van to pick up some of those routes to create efficiency, then I think they would look for that. I don't know that there is necessarily a lot of efficiency with that. The fuel cost differential between the small bus and the big bus is not a whole lot, and the cost of your driver isn't really any different. So running smaller buses doesn't necessarily, I don't think, produce efficiency, but I think they wouldn't rule anything out if they thought it would help achieve what we're trying to achieve. And maybe this isn't, it's not on the agenda, but it's sort of breaking news, I guess, if you want to think about it that way in terms of updates. I had an opportunity this morning, actually late morning into the early afternoon, to provide testimony to the House Ed Committee around Bill H35, which you may have heard me speak about. It's the bill that would remove certain construction costs that we have in our general fund, in our operating budget, from the excess spending threshold. It was a great conversation. I got to sort of tell the Mount Abe story. That bill is sponsored by Representative Conlin, who lives in Cornwall and is a member of the ACSD board, and is actually co-sponsored by our very own Caleb Elder. So there are members involved that obviously understand the situation pretty well. I was able to give our Mount Abe specific story, answer some questions that they had, and I felt positive. I think at least the House Ed Committee appreciates the value of that. I also had a chance to sit in on H78, I think it is, which is a bill that looks at the healthcare increases and considering removing those from the excess spending threshold as well. And though I wasn't scheduled to give testimony, they allowed me to share again a Mount Abe specific situation where Floyd did some number crunching, and our budget increased by somewhere just north of 350,000 for FY22, and 43.5% of that increase was the increase in the healthcare premium. So I was able to give that sort of nugget on a really ground level to the House Ed to understand the impact health insurance premiums is having on school spending. So I thought both of those bills, the discussion in the committee was great. I think there was general understanding of some of those challenges that schools are facing. I certainly appreciated the time to talk with them.
I listened in. I thought you did a great job.
Thank you. I think that's it for updates.
Okay. I'm not seeing any hand. Oh, Kristen Blanchett.
Sorry. Yeah. So as a member of the Community Engagement Committee, that was one major piece that the community was asking for, is for to go to the legislature and plead our case in many ways. So it sounds like on two very important issues you did that. And that's one thing that also the community and we as the board want to have happen. So that's a really positive development. Thank you for doing that. And it sounds like if Dave said you did a good job, you did, right? So, because he was up there for quite a while. So thank you. And I hope the community appreciates your engagement in that way. It's thank you.
And I should add to that, last Tuesday, I was scheduled to offer testimony on school construction aid, related but different. I wasn't able to make it, I had to be at a medical appointment, but Floyd went in my place, did a great job as well. Again, just kind of getting the Mount Abe story out there and some of the particulars to our situation. That's the same bill that I gave testimony on last year. Essentially the same story, but good to refresh everyone's memory. So there's definitely, where there are opportunities, we are doing our part to advocate at the state level for some of these bills that are going to impact us pretty significantly. So the next update is on the, I'm assuming we're ready for that one, Dawn?
Yep, you are.
Um,
Just checking hands.
Yeah. So just kind of circling back around to the December 22nd board questions. So that's the spreadsheet that was linked. I added some information today. Need to get to that spreadsheet here. Just a minute. All right, and I'll share my screen and we can kind of walk through that document. So this is the sort of working document we've been kind of working from as I'm responding to the questions that surfaced on December 22nd. And if we just kind of walk through, so you can see the responses on January 20th that I offered. Kevin's question had some busing implications. That one's still a work in process. That's part of what the consultant will help provide information on. And I mentioned already that we've initiated that conversation with the consultant. The next one, I want to skip over this because this one's going to take us a little deeper. This is looking a little more critically at the Mount Abe closed, tuitioning out our 9-12 and creating K-8 schools scenario that Krista was interested in seeing some numbers on. We'll come back to that. But the other one that I hadn't responded to yet was Liz's question around how schools are working together right now. So linked here is a document that is an attempt to provide that information. And I looked at it from a couple of different perspectives. I thought about what are the relationships between schools within MAUSD currently, but I also thought understanding more about the kind of collaboration happening between MAUSD and Addison Northwest would be useful. So again, looking at schools within MAUSD, we do use what we're calling a sisters school model. You know, as we were merging, we recognized the need for shared staff, and it was complicated because we had, you know, Beeman and Moncton might have shared a PE teacher, but Beeman and Lincoln shared a nurse, and Lincoln and Moncton shared something, and it was just kind of all over the place, and it was really tricky to navigate schedules, especially as we were trying to find equitable instructional time in core areas and in specials. So it was sort of simultaneously with our merger that we created the sister schools model, so that for the most part, there are some exceptions, when there's shared staff, it's shared between sister schools. So we kind of had a medium school and a small school, if you will, pair up. So we have what we call Sisters East, and that's Lincoln and Robinson. And then what we're actually now calling Brothers West, because we have two male principals. So to be, you know, polite to them, we're using the Brothers School model to the west with Moncton and Beeman. And that has really helped those schools work together closely to navigate their schedules to maximize those shared staff. We, of course, have shared professional development across the schools. We have our early release days that we take advantage of, staying focused in expertise and learning and social and emotional learning. And of course, a lot of opportunities for teachers of the same grade, what we call job alikes, have opportunities to meet together and collaborate, share common, you know, problems of practice and work through those. A lot of this staying focused on our strategic plan, which is guiding all of our schools. Then there's the more incidental building principal or classroom teachers just reaching out to colleagues in other schools. This opportunity we've taken advantage of to bring teachers together, I think, has created more relationships across schools and provided more resources to one another in doing so. We do use a common EST and multi-tiered system of support, common report cards, intervention strategies. We use common data. There's definitely support for aligning practices, common amount of instructional time, as I mentioned, for art, music, PE, literacy, math, common lunch and recess time, common intervention time, common expanded learning programs. So that's something that has grown. It hasn't always been true that all of our schools had the same after school support and programming. That is now true, and we're actually working on a middle school pilot after school program, which we're really excited about. All of our schools now offer mentoring programs overseen at the district level. That hasn't always been true. And we also have common collective bargaining agreements and supervision evaluation process. There was a time, we have for quite some time had collective bargaining agreements. I think we're getting more and more cohesive with that. For a while, within our common collective agreements was separate language school by school. There isn't much, if any, of that language that separates out specific schools left in here. So that's really helpful. So that's just sort of a quick overview of within MAUSD. When we think about ways in which we already collaborate with Addison Northwest, we of course share the Career Center, and that includes Addison Central as well, and a few kids from other districts, but primarily Addison Central, Addison Northwest, and MAUSD. With Addison Northwest, we share a football team, we share lacrosse teams. I remember having a student on the field hockey team from Virgins this year. So a lot of athletic collaboration happening. We share food service programs. So A few years back, Addison Northwest was very interested in the food service program that we were providing. They were using a sort of third-party group for their food service. And so we took advantage of partnering with them as they were interested in changing their model. And now we share a food service director, we share an assistant director. That relationship has given us greater buying power as we merge the two. So we have our shared food service. And both districts are also members of the same educational service agency. So the Champlain Valley Educator Development Center is the group that we work with in this region. So curriculum directors, directors of student support services, superintendents are all part of this Champlain Valley region, and they're all served by this Champlain Valley Educator Development Group.
Patrick, if I might add, there are at least two other things that I neglected to help get on this list, and that is the Wayfinder Experience program that we share now, that's housed in Addison, and we share a pre-K coordinator that helps us with our universal pre-K program.
And both of those are also all of Addison County, Addison Northwest, Addison Central, and MAUSD, that we collaborate to create those programs.
Right. We also share occupational therapists and physical therapists. So we collaborate around related services for students with disabilities as well.
So Liz, did that address the question as you were thinking of it?
Yes, because it really, that means a lot to me. I think it shows how important all of our schools are to us and how important it has been, even though we've been losing staff, to really attempt to share services and make sure nobody was left behind and create equity. And it's been a way, I think, to save on finances, certainly like with the food, for instance. I think that right now it's also really important that things like ELP and job likes, that they've been working together, because it's been an opportunity for people to get to know each other and work together, and children to get to know children from other towns. And I think that's a really important piece of being comfortable. And there's just, this just says a lot to me about how we're prioritizing student needs, I guess. So I appreciate you putting the list together. Thank you.
You're welcome. And you mentioned something, Liz, about cost savings by some of these partnerships, which is true. And there's another perspective there as well, which is sometimes we save money through these partnerships, and sometimes it costs the same, but the level of service we provide to our students is improved. So I think that's another lens to that same concept that I think is important to include in the conversation. And I can certainly take any other questions that surface around this before I go back to that questions doc.
I see Hannah and Krista. So how about Hannah?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
We can. I can.
Okay. I just wanted to say, like, kind of along the lines of what Liz was saying, I think it's really cool that we share all these services and really prioritize students getting what they need. And like how Susan was saying, how we have occupational therapists and physical therapists that we share. I have like an in-school OT and an in-school PT, and they're really helpful for me when I'm like adjusting to new classes or a new school year or something, or a new semester like I was a couple weeks ago. And so I just wanted to say thank you for putting that list together, because it makes me feel a little better about all these hard conversations that we're having about things changing. And so I'm glad that we're able to give so much support to people in our community.
Very nice, Hannah. Krista.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Patrick, you said that you feel like in some ways the services are improved in this model or with these opportunities. And I'm just wondering if you could share an example or two of that.
Yeah, I guess when I think about the Addison Wayfinder experience, I think that's a good example. There may be some cost savings there. I don't have the figures in front of me, and that's good if that's true. I know it doesn't cost more than what we were spending for those services before, but when I think about the program that we've created for a similar cost, if not less, it is such a stronger blend of academics and support for academics and academic rigor for some struggling students, and the social and emotional and behavioral support that they need. I feel like other programs historically have done a good job on one side or the other of that equation, but haven't necessarily struck that balance of remaining academically driven and focused while providing social and emotional support. Susan, I'm sure, could elaborate on that example, but that's one that comes to mind for me that maybe doesn't save us a ton of money, but is I would say a pretty significantly improved program for students.
Right, I was going to say, and it enables them to stay in the community. That was one of our. You've highlighted one particular piece that we really wanted to make sure that happened was that students who needed more social emotional support weren't robbed of their opportunity to access general education. And then I think the other piece is that they're able to stay in their community and access community-based resources that are really important for educating the whole child.
Another example is along the same lines. We've partnered a little differently with an outside sort of agency, I guess. It's an agency that we would have historically sent kids to, and kids would have been on the bus. And again, these are kids with some pretty significant challenges that would be on a bus for 45 minutes to an hour each way to an out of district placement, and they'd be going back and forth on a daily basis having their needs met. We partnered differently with this consultant group, with this outside agency, to bring those students in-house into one of the buildings on our facility. We spent some money to make the facility where they were going to be educated warm and safe and comfortable, and all the things that we expect one of our facilities to be for students. But again, it probably isn't saving us a lot of money, but those students are staying in our community. What it's done for opportunities for our own staff to learn and grow from the expertise of this outside agency has been a real benefit. Our ability to reintegrate these students into the daily activities, in particular at Mount Abe. This is a 7-12 oriented program. Because of their proximity to Mount Abe, we can offer that in doses that are a fit for the student need really easily, because it's a walk across the parking lot. So again, that didn't necessarily save a lot of money, but boy, what it does for students, the opportunities it provides for students and our staff are I would say a pretty significant improvement over what they were. And again, Susan can elaborate.
Yeah, I don't have really anything to add to what you described, Patrick. That's a perfect description of, the efforts that we're making, other than we are starting to have conversations about how to measure proficiencies with what we identify as a low incidence population. And that not only benefits the students that are in that program, but current and future students at Mount Abraham.
And I would just also offer that both of these programs we just cited as examples of significant improvement are still in their infancy and are going to continue to get better and better and better as we iron out some of the kinks of new programs. So we're not there yet. I tend to believe we may never be there. I'm not sure what there looks like. There's always something we can work to improve. But boy, we've done some really good things for kids, and that feels good. And it feels good to know that there's still room for growth. I don't know if those are sufficient, Krista, for examples.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Ready for me to move on, Dawn?
Sure. I don't see anybody hands up.
Okay. All right. So that the main, other than the transportation portion of Kevin's question, the main piece that was still kind of left hanging from the December 22nd was really looking more critically at the Mount Abe closure scenario. So I put this together to try and help put some numbers to that concept and kind of see where that lands. So from a conceptual standpoint, I think what I've shared with the board was because our 912 students would be tuitioned out, included in that tuition are facilities costs and other things. So just at a conceptual level, I wasn't really seeing this scenario producing the savings that we needed. And so this exercise was an attempt to put numbers to that and trying to put numbers to it and staffing levels to this scenario that compare to other scenarios we've looked at. So you have somewhat of an apples to apples comparison. So I would say the apples to apples comparison here would be looking out. So this is looking out at FY26. And this is from a staffing level perspective. This is comparable to the scenario where we keep all of our schools open and find the reductions that we need through staffing reductions to get down to the spending target or the spending threshold. So let me kind of start at the bottom and we'll work our way up through. So what you see down here in the bottom left shows, if I kind of start with the staffing costs. So this was looking at the staffing that is referenced up above for our K-8 schools. This is looking at staffing levels that we would need from a district perspective. So those two would be in combination. Then I have the tuition cost for 912, and we made some assumptions here. So using the NESDEC numbers, we're projected to have 404 students in grades 9 through 12 in FY26. So we just sort of divided those up amongst the 3 school districts. And in terms of the tuition assumptions, we're assuming those districts are at the spending threshold. Each of these 3 districts is going to be impacted by the weighting study, presumably. And they're all going to be impacted by a decrease in their equalized pupils. So really hard to predict exactly where they're going to be. So the assumption here is that they set a target of not exceeding the spending threshold. And because of the challenges districts are facing, I think they're likely to be bumping up against that. Maybe they'd find some efficiencies by taking in some students from our district. Hard to know, but I thought this was probably the safer place to go in terms of assumptions. And so you can see how this sort of totals this 8,313,000. As Floyd was talking with, I think this was with Betcha. I think it was with Betcha. I don't think it was with the transportation consultant. So this could get refined a bit. But in talking with transportation folks, Floyd's analysis was that if we assume responsibility for busing, which is an assumption, it's not a guarantee that we would necessarily own any of that cost. Districts may sort of compete for our students by offering transportation, but we can't necessarily make that assumption. So if we were to take on that responsibility, above and beyond what our contract for transportation already is, it was projected to be about $232,000 more. We are still responsible for career center costs for our high schoolers. And so we built in what those costs are projected to be. So that's looking at our current costs and then I think a 2 or 3% increase per year going forward out to FY26. Then we looked at non-staffing costs. So I really went through the budget in the level of detail that has been prepared and shared with you all and with the community, looking at direct instruction, substitutes, athletics, student support, etc. Looking at basically all those costs outside of staffing, because again, all the staffing costs are already captured up above. So these are all non-staffing costs that we would expect to carry forward as we operated K-8 buildings. And then again, usually a default to a 2% increase per year. And really try to separate out, for example, anything that was adult driven, like so if it was related to the amount of staffing we had, given that we wouldn't be operating grades 9 through 12, grades 9 through 12 represents about 30% of the grades we operate. So I only used 70% of whatever those costs would be that were associated with something that was kind of staffing based. For example, substitute teachers, assuming we have about 30% fewer of our teachers, then we can assume 30% less need for substitute teachers. So those sorts of things, trying to adjust. Anything that was driven by student support, I used only 80%, knowing that we provide a higher level of support for our younger students than our older students. And as we're tuitioning out those 9th through 12th graders, 80% of that cost seemed reasonable. So unless there was some other reason for a different percentage, those were sort of the concepts I used in thinking this through. I did not keep the full 1.1 million in the facilities improvements, but I also didn't zero that out because we want to be able to invest in our elementary schools, which are going to become K-8 schools as well. So instead of the 1.1 million, I thought 50% of that was probably too high and 25% felt too low. So I stuck with 1/3 of that amount and then again rolled that forward by, I think, I don't remember if I used 2% or 5% increase each year. 5% would be based on the concept of trying to keep up with what cost escalation is for construction services. But that kind of gives you a sense of some of the thinking behind what these figures are. And then we have our total projected 9-12 costs, total projected K-8, giving us our total expenses. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to ask you if for non-staffing K through 8 costs, direct instruction is in there, but isn't that staffing?
There is a staffing component to direct instruction, but there's also, if I can pull this up, there are non-staffing related expenses in direct instruction as well. So looking at tuition to private schools, equipment repair and maintenance, supplies, textbooks, software, equipment.
Okay, got
all
it.
sorts of things.
So anything that falls in that line called direct instruction, but that's not staffing.
Correct.
Gotcha.
And so we have our total projected cost, and then we have our total projected revenue, which gives us our ed spending. And if we remember, ed spending is what we divide by our equalized pupils to get us a cost per equalized pupil, and that's what the threshold is based on, et cetera. So when we divide this 26 million and change by, and if we come down here, by what we're projecting is 1,238.38 equalized pupils. So this does account for the weighting study, and we're expecting by FY26 that we will have realized whatever the impact of the weighting study is going to be. That brings us to a cost per equalized pupil of $21,054. The threshold, as we saw before with the tuition cost, is $20,579. So that puts us $475 over per student and $588,000 over in total. So working from that, if we come back up, we can look at what the staffing is that still has us almost $600,000 over the spending threshold. So here's the staffing level school by school, looking at it grade configuration and class size. So if we look at Bristol, what you see here is 2 kindergarten classes, one at 18, one at 19, a first grade at 25, a 1-2 at 24, and so on. And so you can see kindergarten at 18, 19, but the others are 23 to 25 at Bristol. We slide over to Lincoln. K1 of 21, a 2-3 of 20, a 4-5-6 class of 27, and a combined 7th, 8th grade at 18. And so on to Moncton, Beeman, and Robinson. So you're seeing classes routinely in the mid-20s, some pushing the upper 20s. You're seeing combinations of grades that are potentially pretty tricky, in particular with a number of kids. And you're seeing pretty small, relatively speaking, 7th and 8th grade classes. Bristol's comparable to the others, a little bit smaller at Lincoln, definitely smaller at Moncton. And again, this could go different ways, right? So if we look at the Moncton, those 2 14s could become a 28. That's something that we could do. That's one that frees up 1 FTE that could go somewhere else. Then you see a couple of 15s at Robinson. I guess they could be 30. We're starting to get pretty big at that point. But that kind of gives you a sense of what the projected grade configuration and class size would be. And this just shows you how many K6 classroom teachers, how many FTE of the English, math, science, social studies teachers at the middle level. You can see some pretty small FTE sizes here. This is somewhat intentional, trying to think as reasonable as we can in these cases where, so this 0.17 and 0.33 is a 0.5. And then we have another 0.5 we could combine at the Beeman Robinson, and that keeps a 0.5 at Bristol. So this is a 1.5 FTE, just in terms of something reasonable to try and fill. Then we look at administrators. So this still, I think this has 1 more administrator than what the other scenario did. I think we had reduced by 2 before, and this reduces by 1. Similar instructional coaching level to other scenarios you've seen, and so on. So you can see, I would describe this as a bare bones level of staffing. What I do think is important to highlight, and it factors into the administrator conversation a bit, but I think it really factors into the support in classrooms as well. Like in the FY26 scenario where we keep all schools open and reduce staff to find the savings, this assumes no general ed assistants. So those kindergarten classes or K1 classes of 21 or 24, some are smaller, 16, 18, 19, would not have an aide in those classrooms, which is different from what our practice has been. And also there are no behavior assistants. So we're now looking at, if we take Bristol, for example, this is a K8 building with 329 students, no behavior assistant. So it's the principal, and in Bristol's case with 1.9, probably principal and assistant principal, addressing behavior concerns that surface. And then you have less than 1.0 FTE building principal in each of the smaller schools in this scenario, which again, we can adjust FTEs. Like if we thought that was untenable, we could increase FTEs of administrators. Like for example, we could combine the 2 14s in the middle school at Moncton and make them a 128, and that 1.0 FTE of professional staff would probably be enough to bump the administrators up more. So we can play with FTEs that way, but from a dollars and cents perspective, it's the cumulative FTEs that produce the budget that you saw. Then again, projecting out to FY26, looking at what total compensation could be for central office positions. So I separated these out because they're sort of a different category than, say, building leaders would be, or licensed professional educators or support staff. So they felt different enough to calculate those figures separately. And then for these positions under here, which again, we've reduced 75% of our, if I can find it here, of our coordinators have been reduced. 50% of our special ed coordinators have been reduced. So there are substantial reductions to some of those district positions in here as well. There is a reduction in support staff at the central office. I think most notably in accountants. We currently have, I think, 1.2 FTE. So there's a reduction there. And all of that, and we're still almost 600,000 over the threshold as projected.
Krista has her hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick, for doing this. I had a couple of questions. So the first is that it looks like you assumed staffing reductions in all of the elementary schools, even with reducing the MAUSD staff. So that how many elementary school staff overall were reduced in addition to all the high school staff? What was the total?
I don't have that in front of me. What was interesting as I was working through this scenario, in the other scenarios, we started from a place of taking everything we have now, moving it forward, and then backing out costs to get down to where we needed to be. As I was building this, because it was so different, I had to start from $0 and build in the staffing that was needed. And I would say this is bare bones needed, not desired, but needed, and calculate those costs going forward. So I had to take a different approach to this. So it's not as easy to back into the staffing comparisons. I can do that, but that will take some different kind of work and more time.
Is it safe to say, though, that if you had kept the staffing at the elementary schools the way it is, and then just remove them out the high school level positions, we would be significantly more over the threshold than what you're showing here?
I would say pretty conservatively, and Floyd can see if he agrees with this, I would say pretty conservatively, you're looking at $2 million more. And if I just look at it from this perspective, Bristol currently has, I think, 14 classroom teachers. So there's 3 more. That's almost $300,000 in FY26.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Lincoln has, and I'm just looking at K6 classroom teachers. So we're at 4 for Bristol, 3 for Lincoln. Now we're at 7 more. Moncton, I think, currently has 6 or 7. So we're at 8 or 9. Beeman has 4, so that brings us up to 9 or 10. Robinson has, I think, at least 6, so we're at 11 or 12. So when you're looking at ballpark $100,000 per professional staff total compensation, there's 11, that's 1.1 million. And then there's a lot of the other parts and pieces that probably bring us up probably north of $2 million more in spending.
And then I'm not seeing, like, for middle school, for example, language instructors or
correct.
Well, that's the one that kind of jumps out at me the most. So I guess I'm also asking, when you move over the teachers for, core subjects, it looks like you didn't move over for 7-8. It looks like you didn't include anything beyond those core instructors.
Correct. I will say, I mean, there's more time, say, like I ensured there was sufficient wellness FTEs so that they could get wellness. Same with music, same with art. So those are here. But some of the other, I don't know if I'd call them electives, but if we think of it that way, so some of the design tech isn't here.
But the wellness person would be shared. The 0.8 at Bristol would be shared with the elementary school.
Yeah, the 0.8 is for Bristol as a K-8. So that would serve kindergarten through 8th grade.
Right. Okay.
And that's true for all of those positions, right? So from administrators down through nurses, all of those people are serving grades K through 8. I only separated out the instructors up above as K6 and 7, 8 to give you a sense of the FTEs of the core subjects for middle school.
Okay, and Krista's done. It looks like Rob has his hand up as well.
And I don't know, is it easier for me to stop sharing my screen now or better to keep it up? I'm happy to do either.
I guess maybe keep it up in case there's questions.
Okay.
And then I can see Steve is after Rob.
Yeah, Patrick, so sorry, I was getting distracted by my daughter. You said you don't know, because in your proposal with the different scenarios, we're going to have let go of 75 to 91 positions out at FY26. Am I correct in rephrasing that?
Mm-hmm.
Some a ballpark there? So,
yeah, 75 to 90, yes. Yep.
So I guess, I mean, how many people are employed in this scenario versus the other scenarios, if that makes sense? Instead of a place of reduction, like where are we at overall numbers?
Sure.
I guess you might not have it, and that's fine.
No, I can give you a ballpark. So we employ somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 people. I think we might be just over that. So in the scenario before, we were going to subtract from that 300, let's say 90. So that left us at 210. What we can see here, so we have 60 professional positions plus 5 administrators. So we're at 65 plus 27. So we're at, I think, 92 there. Keep a running tally here. And then we have 25, let me just make sure this, yeah, 25.79. So we'll call that 26 positions there, plus 10. So that's 128 employed here compared to 210 in the other. But we have to remember, we're employing a lot less, but chances are our 404 high schoolers that are going somewhere else are going to require those other high schools to employ more people. So we're employing less, but they're going to employ more, presumably somewhere around the amount that we were employing, perhaps less, because they may find efficiencies. And that's where that shift happens.
And then one other question, because I don't know the specifics of the legislation, but in your proposal, you showed different legislation, going in either favor or non-favor for our district, like Act 173. Would that influence these numbers at all? The bill that you just testified today on, I know you spoke to the pupil weighting study, but can you speak to those two, how that influences these numbers?
Sure. So the weighting study I mentioned, so that it is accounted for here. The Act 173, we project is going to be a benefit to us. I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 200,000. Floyd may be able to jump in on that. So that was going to help us by about 200,000 from a revenue perspective. And then so that's not factored in here. So that's a plus or minus 200,000. And the other thing that's not reflected here would be the bill that I testified to earlier today on the construction costs that could benefit us, and a lot of nuance, right, in terms of what is eligible expenses, et cetera. So there's a lot to still figure out there, but that could potentially benefit us by about $1 million. So if that were to happen in this scenario, this, near 600,000 over the threshold could go to $400,000 or $500,000 under the spending threshold, depending on how all that played out. This also, it's really important to note, this also does not account for, so this is using NESDEC's enrollment projections, which is what we were using in the other scenarios. This doesn't account for loss of enrolled students and therefore equalized pupil from home study students not returning. So this basically assumes we never lost those 73 or 78 or however many home study students it was, or assumes that they all come back, which may not be true. So still a lot of moving parts for sure.
Okay, and then Steve Rooney.
So Patrick, you said this was kind of a build-up exercise rather than a subtractive exercise. So I'm assuming you're not carrying any costs at all for operating Mount Abe?
Correct. Which is also not necessarily an accurate assumption, right? So this does assume, it doesn't assume any cost, but it also doesn't assume we got some money from selling Mount Abe, right? So this was just let's pretend Mount Abe doesn't cost us anything and it didn't bring anything in.
Right. So obviously, until we do sell the building, we have to operate it to keep the value asset from deteriorating. So there would be some operational cost up to the point where we were able to get rid of it.
Yep. And I can share the Mount Abe specific sort of operating costs. And again, these would be different if the building was unoccupied, presumably a bit less. I don't know how much less really. But looking at electricity, supplies, etc., Mount Abe specifically, this does not, of course, include the 1.1 million in capital improvements, is $563,592. That's in the FY22 budget.
Right.
So some portion of that could be assumed here until we sold the property.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. All right. And then we have Kristen Blanchette.
Yeah, so Patrick, if we were going to look at this as a actual thing we were going to do, I'd want testimony from educators on how to optimally educate middle school students, because my understanding is that doing it in this chopped up way in little groups isn't optimal or best practice. So if this was something we were going to seriously pursue, I think we would need information from that sort of expert.
I agree. I think we'd want to hear from the kids too. I'd want to talk to, as a former sixth grade teacher, I'd want to hear from those sixth graders about their thoughts of 2 more years in the building. You know, I have a lot of concern about what not operating a high school means for our community. When we think about community hubs, when we've talked about this before as well, Mount Abe and the activities that happen there is the most significant community hub that we operate as a school district. I don't think there's any question about that. And I even think about it from a school district perspective. Without Mount Abe, what unifies us? I think that's an interesting thing to think about too. So for me, there's a dollars and cents component to this, and that's a lot of what we're having to wrestle with. But there's also what do we want for our community? What do we want for our students? That's an important perspective to have as well.
Okay. And then Liz Sayer.
I just wanted to add that if we were going to consider choicing out our high schoolers, I think we'd have to seriously consider having all of our K through 8s at Mount Abe. If I was trying to imagine which scenario would give us the very smallest class sizes that was possible, it would be, what would it be that? I mean, not that we want teeny tiny class sizes, but the smallest class sizes possible would be if all of our kids were together.
Yeah, I think, I mean, again, the way we achieve class sizes that are desirable and keep costs where we want them to be is driven by finding those efficiencies. And I think what I've demonstrated and what I still believe to be true is that the fewer buildings our students are in, the greater efficiencies we can find, and therefore the the more robust support and services we can offer for the same dollar.
Okay, and then Krista Siringo.
Yeah, Patrick, could you, maybe you can't do this right now, and if not, that's okay. But if you had to, would you be able to give us a ballpark of savings if we had this option, but merged? So in other words, I know that would significantly reduce our central office expenses. And so I just wondered what that looks like.
Yeah, I think if we couple this with merger, we probably save around another $1 million annually in the efficiencies at the central office level. So again, so there's another moving part, right? So we have the $1 million in construction services, we have a couple $100,000 in Act 173 and the special education block grant, and then we could have this moving piece of additional savings. So it is possible that this figure gets under the spending threshold by several $100,000 to $1 million if everything went that way. And then we are in a position to start putting positions back in. Okay, so what do we start adding back in? We probably do something about these class sizes if we had that much money to reinvest in other ways. Probably do something about these other core middle school options. So yeah, then it's an exercise of really thinking about in what ways do we want to reinvest to give the students the experience we want to give them.
And Don, I don't know if anybody else has their hand up. I did have one other question, but I can wait.
I just have one comment, but you can go ahead and I can make it after you.
Oh, okay. I just was wondering I just don't really know what other options there are for a district if you don't operate a high school. Like, is tuitioning out, is this the option or are there others?
There are others. So really, I think it's finite. I think two come to mind at least though. One is tuitioning out like we are. Basically, students get to choose what high school they attend. I'm thinking about Grand Isle Supervisory Union, Grand Isle School District, and they don't operate, and I don't think have for quite some time, maybe ever, operate a high school, and their students, I believe, get choice in what high school they attend. And I do think the practice there is that certain school districts sort of, I don't know if I'd call it wooing, but offer transportation as incentive to come to their school district. So that's an example where I believe that happens. An alternative is, and I think this happens elsewhere as well, but I can't cite specifically where I've heard of it, we can designate a high school. Like we could say, we are no longer operating 9 through 12, and we designate Virgins as the high school where all of our students will go. So that's the other option.
Okay, thank you.
Where I think that gets tricky for us, right? Like, let's say we designated Middlebury. Well, if I live in the far northeast corner of Starksboro, Middlebury's a hall, and CVU is not too far away. And you could play that out in a lot of different scenarios. So there are some disadvantages to going that route.
You can't designate several different high schools based on geography?
I don't think so. I'd have to look into that, but I think you have to designate a high school if you choose to not operate one or allow school choice. But I'd have to find out if there's another option.
Okay, Steve, I see your hand up.
Well, Don, you can go ahead if you want.
That's all right. I'll go last. That's all right. Go ahead.
Just curious about the ability of these elementary schools to actually serve 7th and 8th graders. Does add outdoor activities, hallway activity between the oldest and the youngest, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just a comment.
Yeah, I agree. That's a concern I have as well. I think I think they'd be okay, not great. I don't think it'd be what middle schoolers have grown accustomed to in terms of what they have access to on the Mount Abe campus, both in terms of the grounds, but also the facility. And I think it's not impossible. I guess that's the short of that. I do wonder too about athletics. I think that it's significantly different there, right? So somehow, like, I don't think Beeman could have a middle school boys basketball team. They'd have to somehow, we'd have to bring our middle schoolers together somewhere to have sufficient numbers of students to have those opportunities. Right now, right now with the number, although I should say basketball is probably not a good example because we have lots of kids that want to play basketball in middle school. But some other sports I know struggle, like softball is an example of something where numbers have been really low, and there's no way that we could even offer softball at the middle level without bringing all of the kids that wanted to together. So we'd have to navigate some logistics there about how do we get kids to a location for that. In particular, if we don't own the Mount Abe facility anymore, we'd hopefully have some sort of agreement with them, or we'd have to work something up with some other rec club to have a location, because none of our schools, maybe not none, one or two of our schools could have, they don't currently, but could have outdoor facilities that could accommodate middle level sports. And Bristol's really the only school that has a gym that could accommodate indoor sports.
Okay, Kristen Blanchett.
I just want to mention that softball is already combined all towns. 2 years ago, last time I had a softball team, it was just one team for the entire 5 towns.
We're seeing that a lot in youth sports, the need really for towns to combine to have enough kids to field teams.
Don't tell Donnie.
They keep winning championships somehow, so he's got something figured out. We don't have many, but they're mighty.
So I'm not seeing any other hands. Kristen, are you all set? Yep. Okay.
So I have a question.
All right, Kevin.
Backing up to Krista's comment about with this scenario, if we go ahead with a merger in Virgins, I'm a little confused on what the high school part of that merger. I'm a little confused about what that merger would look like.
It'd really be just central office. The merger that I was recommending had savings from 7 through 12 efficiencies, as well as central office efficiencies, but obviously those 7 through 12 efficiencies don't exist if we're not really operating. I suppose we could talk about a 7th and 8th grade still going to Virgins as part of a merger instead of being in K-8 buildings. But that would be the, beyond central office, that would be the only additional place we could look for efficiency.
Thank you.
Okay, my only question or comment was in this sort of play out of no high school, does that assume that the buildings are used as they exist right now as structure wise, or do you foresee that changes have to be made to accommodate changes to the building have to be made to accommodate the 7th and 8th graders?
Yeah, I talked more with Shannon at Mount Abe to understand. So Shannon was a former middle school science teacher. So that was where my mind kept going, was what's a science lab need to be, or what should it be for middle schoolers? And she said, obviously having great science labs is a wonderful thing, but really for middle level science, it's not necessary to have access to all the chemicals and the science lab equipment. Like they're still really working on the basics of science. So hearing that and really thinking science was the one that was going to be most significantly impacting the facility, it didn't seem like structural changes would be needed to accommodate that instruction in our schools as they stand. So this assumes the structures stay as they are. Although I would say most, probably all of our facilities need a lot of work from an accessibility standpoint. So we would want to tackle those projects, whether they're K-8 or K-6 or whatever else. Which is part of why I wanted to leave some portion of that 1.1 million for construction services in this budget to be able to continue to improve the facilities that we do use, whichever they may be.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands. I can't kind of scroll through.
I'll do that for you, see if that helps.
Oh, thanks. Looking at everybody 3 at a time takes a while.
And I can share again if somebody has a question that needs me to go back into the document.
I'm not seeing any. All right, was that the last of the board questions that you had answers for tonight?
I think so, yeah. And I think that again, with the transportation piece of Kevin still out there, I think that satisfies all of the questions to date.
Okay. All right. Okay, then we'll move along to the board management and governance portion of the agenda. And as we were talking, Krista and Patrick and I, about building this agenda, we had several questions that surfaced for ourselves as we began building it. So we came to this point of, we really haven't heard thoughts or questions regarding the December 7th recommendation. We haven't had to sit and just everybody hear each other's thoughts kind of thing. I don't want to put them on the spot, but I also, having Hannah and Bella here, and it's not terribly late, and I'm wondering if either of them has comments they want to make about the recommendation, because they've been at a couple of the last meetings but left before the end and not been able to comment. So if the students have would like to comment, I would like to let them go first tonight.
Hannah, would you want to go first? I think I'm still trying to gather my thoughts.
I think she might have stepped away to eat something. So I will get her attention and have her share her thoughts in a minute.
Okay. All right. So board members, are there any of you who'd like to share your thoughts? Let's see, I'll start with Kevin.
It's just a formatting thing. We had laid out this matrix, if you will, and I'm just wondering if we would be talking to the points on that matrix, or is this kind of a freewheeling conversation at this point?
At this point, I think we wanted it to be just to hear from each other, because we haven't had that opportunity to just hear from each other. Liz?
Yeah, I was looking forward to going down through the values and talking about how it applies to each one of the values.
Okay. Dave?
So, like I said earlier, my biggest concern, I think, about the proposal on the table is how many resources it takes out of elementary education when I think the most critical period of educating our children is pre-K to 3. And so combining that with the feedback that I've heard in the community about closing schools, the question that occurs to me is it possible to deliver better services to our pre-K through 3-year-old children and keep our community elementary schools open? What would that mean? And so that's my reaction at this point.
Okay. All right. Hannah's willing. So let's hear from Hannah.
This is about Patrick's original proposal, right?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, I really liked it when I heard it. Because for me, like, I consider myself a creative person and a student especially, who likes hands-on stuff, and like STEM is really cool. Like, we're doing a bunch of really interesting labs in my science class right now, and that's probably my favorite part of it. And so I think turning some elementary schools into like places where kids can have that type of stuff to do is really cool, and honestly, like, really beneficial for kids. And they can go and like learn about stuff in more depth, like outside of their classrooms, that they wouldn't really be able to inside their classroom spaces. And I understand how important people's town schools are to them, but I also think that this is a really good solution to a problem that we really can't wait any longer to start solving. And I think it's a really good opportunity for kids to be really creative and hands-on. And I wish I had gotten the opportunity to do this, because I feel like it'll be really cool for kids to be able to do. So, yeah.
Thank you, Hannah.
Is it okay if I go now?
Sure, Bella.
So I guess I'm really stuck on, seeing this proposal.
We lost you, Bella. Bella?
And I think I would rather see a few elementary school clues.
You're cutting out, Bella. We're missing part of it. Bella, we missed some of what you were saying.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. No, I just said it's hard for me to see Mount Abe close, and I'd rather see elementary school, or some of the elementary schools close. And I think with a few of the towns combining, it will create a tighter community bond. And I think if we were to have high school students go to different high schools, that we would lose some of that community bond in sports and everything.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then Krista.
One thing I just have been thinking about is that I hope we can look at the importance of the experiences of younger kids in the same light as the importance of the experience of some of our older kids, and find ways to ensure that all of them are getting a really robust education. And I think that whatever we do, I really would hate to see us under-resource any age group to serve another age group, because as the parent of teenagers, sometimes I think they need me more now than they did when they were younger. And when they were younger, I couldn't imagine them needing me any more than they did at that time. So I think all of the ages, the stress and anxiety that a lot of our middle and high school kids are experiencing are as real as the need for fully embrace wraparound services for the little guys. So I just want to make sure that we keep that focus on all of the age groups. And this doesn't speak to Patrick's particular proposal, but just in general, that to me it's less about what can we cut and more about what can we grow. So.
Okay. Any other board members? Oh, Kristen Blanchett.
Hi. So I think that it's harder for 12 to 18-year-olds to find belonging and feel that they belong somewhere than it is for littler kids. And I'll just tell a story. So when my kids were little, I wanted them to go to a really good preschool. As you said, Dave, that's the most important thing. And so I chose Quarry Hill School in Middlebury, even though I live in northern Moncton. And so for several years, I drove my kids down there. I was very lucky I could take a few years off and drive them around. So I drove them there to Sue White's school. I don't know if Sue is on today. They got an absolutely fabulous preschool experience. It was a pain in the butt for me, especially since one of them used to often throw up in the car early in the morning. But, and we met people from all over, from more of the Middlebury district, some people from our district, from Bristol. So then when my kids got to middle school, here were all these kids they had gone to preschool with, and it was kind of cool. Like the Lorentz and, all these families that went to Quarry Hill also. So that was awesome. And now still, my daughter who's in college has friends that she went to Quarry Hill with and then went to Mount Abe with, and they had stronger bonds because of that, because they met when they were 4. So again, it's harder for 12 to 18-year-olds to find belonging and feel that they belong somewhere just because of where they're at developmentally than younger kids. You can pretty much plop younger kids anywhere and they're going to be okay if they are doing okay anyway. So it's just an observation from the work that I do and from watching my kids, and something I don't know that's been brought up yet. So thank you.
Okay. Sarah McLean.
Yeah, just circling back around to reactions to the December 7th, which just literally seems like a lifetime ago. I definitely felt blindsided by it becoming a board-led decision as opposed to a voter decision. And I'm curious, and I don't even think it's a productive inquiry, but now that we have counsel, I know we haven't been in executive session, but the gist that I'm gathering from our counsel is saying that the board has the authority to change any article other than what was named in the order, Article 10. And I'm just curious if that was considered in the recommendation, that there would be, the will of the board would be to change language in Act 46, and if that was considered in the recommendation, and if that was ever a red flag and just process of this recommendation, acting upon this recommendation.
You mentioned wouldn't be a productive inquiry, so I don't know if you're looking for me to respond or not. I have some thoughts, though. I mean, for me, the number, what I was striving to do in making my recommendation, outside of any process, I was focused on an end. And I was focused on an end that was going to meet the financial requirements that I feel we have to meet given the projections that we made, stays absolutely focused on improving outcomes for students. Again, not maintaining outcomes for students, improving outcomes for students, and acknowledged and recognized and honored what I was hearing resoundingly from our community, which is do not close our schools. I'm not saying my recommendation is perfect. I can appreciate how people feel like what I recommended is closure. I maintain it's not closure. Those schools are not locked up. They're not sold to or given to the town. They're still used for educational purposes. And so I feel like my recommendation was, as an end, the best way to thread all of the competing interests and realities and staying focused on improving outcomes for kids. Nothing about the way in which the process would need to unfold was driving that decision. In my recommendation, I highlighted the reality that I believe to be true for the purpose of avoiding reactions or thoughts or accusations of hiding the fact that the board has that authority. As it turns out, that backfired on me because people I've heard are saying that my motivation was to skirt a vote of the community, when that wasn't my motivation at all.
Rob?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. I guess my 30,000 foot view is that whatever solution or proposal we come to our communities with, that it's of the people and not from a person. And I say this in two ways. First, this is Patrick's proposal. And after getting letters from Lincoln Community School staff, the Robinson staff, members throughout our 5 towns that signed on to letters, this needs to be a proposal that includes everybody. That's the only way it's really going to feel like an honest solution to the problems we have. And then secondly, when I say that it should be a proposal of people and not a person, I think a lot about the opinion of one lawyer. And if we're going to tinker with the Articles of Agreement, if we're going to leverage the law to try to force this proposal through, it will do long-term damage to our school district. And so, again, that's why I think we can use this time that we have now to make this a proposal of the people. That includes our teachers, our students, our community members, our select board. People are ready and willing to share their ideas, and I think we need to listen and have conversations with them. As far as some details, I really think it's simple math. We have 5 K-6 elementary schools. The proposal shows us with 2 elementary schools. You get from 5 to 2 by closing 3 elementary schools. That's just how I see it. That letter we got from the Starksboro Planning Commission, they talked about real estate agents, and I picture a family moving to Starksboro, maybe really close to Robinson Elementary School, and saying, or looking at a house by Robinson Elementary School and saying, wow, like a school right next to where we're going to live. We have 3 kids, we have another on the way. And that real estate agent trying to explain what an innovation center is to that family. I don't know if they would decide then to move there, because I don't see that as a school personally. The idea of the innovation centers, albeit innovative, Ken Dinnersmith is a venture capitalist, not an educator. Jeff Miller put together a really incredible list of ways that we already incorporate innovation into our strategic plan, RNs, you name it. So I'm not really sold on these innovation centers because they don't really seem to have a lot of detail, and we're putting a lot of resources to them. You know, in FY23, you've allocated $1.2 million with 5 staff. When you move that out to FY26, that's $1.32 million to keep these, you know, innovation hubs open. And I'll be honest, I don't think that's a good use of our money, moving out that far down the road as we, you know, think about getting closer and closer to the spending threshold. And I think about students, like if you're a 5th grader right now in Robinson or Beeman or Lincoln Community School, you'll be a 6th grader in that school next year. But then as a 7th grader, you'll be at Mount Abe. As an 8th grader, you'll be in Virgins. And as a 9th grader, you'll be back at Mount Abe. And that's a time of life where your hormones have hormones. And coming out of a global pandemic, when our kids are looking to have social and emotional stability, I think that plan right there probably provides the least amount of sort of a concrete, you know, place where they can rely on going for more than just 1 year upon 1 year. If you're a family, you know, you could have children in 5 different schools, possibly. Maybe one down in Beeman, a student in Virgins, a student in Bristol and Moncton, and at Mount Abe. And I am concerned about that. That seems like a really, really heavy lift for families. And again, I just think about social and emotional well-being, which was really highlighted with our community survey. And I don't know how that meets the social and emotional well-being of a family in these other towns. Busing is a big concern. I appreciate that we're looking at, you know, a little more detail in regarding busing, but, you know, I live at the end of a dirt road in South Lincoln. It's a haul to get to Virgins. I did it just the other day just to give it a try in a Subaru Outback with my 21-year-old daughter in the back seat, and it took us 47 minutes basically to get there from my house. So that's a big concern for me. And then I guess a big picture when I think about our district moving forward, I see our 5-town elementary schools as really the assets that we have in our district, and then as Mount Abe is just the building, not the people inside, is the liability. You know, to think that we've had 3 bonds fail, that's a pretty good indicator to me that people aren't really looking to invest any more money into that building to get it up to what we want to have it be, is just a 21st century learning center that meets the needs of all our students. And so, you know, that gives me pause of concern when we think about the logistics of a merger and asking a school district that, you know, just raised a lot of money to improve their facilities, wanting to send their students over to a building that folks have not really wanted to support, maybe to the levels that we need them to support year over year. So that's a big concern that I have. And then I also think, you know, if we were to go forth with this proposal, I think phase 1, we wouldn't see all those 77 homeschool students come back. I think we would lose elementary students to outside entities, and I think we'd just sort of maybe be stuck back in the same position. We need all the students in the buildings, but closing 3 up, I think, will actually do us more damage than we think provide savings, in my opinion. So that's a lot of talking, but that's what I've been chewing on for a long time now. I think we really need to make this a proposal of the people. Thank you for listening.
Okay. And Liz?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So are we going to kind of do a little bit of a, I mean, I was thinking of it in terms of values before, but I've been thinking about a lot of the stuff that you said, Rob, as well. But I'm, you know, just make from a different view. So I'm really grateful for this proposal. I think it gives us a great starting point. I think that, you know, Beeman for your pre-K would still be a choice because all their towns would remain with their pre-Ks open. I thought that I saw in the form that we were watching that you had addressed that, or you had written in there that you didn't think moving the certain grade around that much, like first moving to the 6th graders to Mount Abe and then potentially the next change after that. I thought I saw a note in there about that being something that should and could be addressed. So I think we have more talking to do there. I also looked pretty deeply into some of Jeff Miller's links that he had sent. He had sent it to Kristen and perhaps all of us. And this is most certainly something, and I think it's fantastic that our strategic plan lines up with what we're doing. When I read the Picus and Odin report, I noticed that we're doing a really good job. I've noticed a lot of the steps that we've been making have been moving us towards that model, but there's more that we haven't gone towards yet, and more in our strategic plan. And if this proposal brings us closer to that, that's great. Like there's tutoring, because I really want to think access to education, social emotional learning, all of the things that are on our values list. I think it's kind of amazing that we have in some ways survived these last few years. Since I've been on the board, it's been a constant cut upon cut upon cut. And there's been these mitigations and how the schools have worked together to try to still have the supports and not make it be as noticeable, but to just continue down a road where it's just, okay, well, we'll see what we can do with less, and see what we can do with less is not something I think that is a good plan for our kids. We don't, if people working in our system don't feel like can't feel like I know, well, next year or the year after, I mean, it's just to make a change where it's just one cut instead of year over year over year, having to take so much out, and just to say, like, I work here, I know I'm going to be able to work here for a long time, and not just have this environment where you might be aware of when you were last hired. And so if we can pull kids together, and we don't have our specialists spending time on the road in between schools, I mean, taking that drive back and forth between each other, I mean, that's time that they could be in one school working with students there. And so I'm getting really cluttered here, and I apologize for that, but the values list really broke it out really well. But there's examples of when this has gone poorly, and there's examples of when it's gone well. And one of the articles I read, and what from Jeff, was an example of a place where they had a 95 and a 97% approval rate for this to happen. And what they did was pretty amazing. I don't know if we could do this. They started grade sharing first, and they really got all the towns together and said, what, as you as an identity as a school, what is most important to you? What are your most important routines and special things that you do here that you need to see? And asked each school that, and created a new identity for the school, and they got new uniforms. So it wasn't like one town was swallowing up this other town, and they had a community that I felt really reflected us. And they had those hard conversations about so many different things, and transportation and all of that. It's almost like we need to have a goal so we can start working towards it really, really well. So I look forward to the day when we kind of have said, this works for us, because under every definition that I have been able to find, Bristol and Moncton would still be small, rural, local community schools in every sense of all of those words. None of the reports even talk about towns specifically. We really have so much to gain from each other. The pandemic has very much the opposite made me feel like we need these separate schools. It's made me feel like we need each other. Our kids need the other kids. The families need the other families. If you are connected in that way, like coming together will compound, kind of like Bella said, will compound our opportunities. I would love to see kids from another school grow up. I would love that if people were in Bristol, maybe they'd have somewhere they could walk after school. Maybe we could keep providing the ELP. Everyone has different needs, but a lot of families need the opportunity to get some learning and some fun in the summer for their kids. Even, is so much about this that's really important. Where I'm with you is that I'm not sure that I support the buildings being, but I guess it's that's definitely a community decision for me, whether or not they become an innovation center or or just owned by the town. I mean, for the town, they'd be in complete control. It wouldn't be like you have to get permission to use the building. It would maybe be vice versa. Or a kiddo takes the bus up to a friend's house in Lincoln and goes there after school. I feel like we need each other. We need the volunteers that do all of these, all of the keep our towns, our local schools, all of that power and empowerment and all the ideas that we have. I feel like we're going to really need those, even with Bristol and Moncton being the only two schools our kids are in. They will still be so small and they will still need all of that support. We're going to have to give it everything that we have. And so to say that would be something, when I saw in the paper, there was a girl who had a mentor that followed her from South Burlington all the way down through her career down here. I don't think there's any scenario in which our schools lose community support. That's on us if that happens. We gotta, and I could go on for the longest. And so I hope that everybody takes this chance to just kind of get it out a little bit, concerns or things that are exciting about this, because it's a lot and it's been done before. And I think we can look to some examples of that. As long as students having their access to education, access to support, that we're really looking at how challenging some classrooms can be when they get too big, and thinking about best practice. I don't want to get too lost in something, like the vote, for instance. I know that we as a group could decide to put repurposing out for a vote and then move on to the academic pieces here, talk about why Moncton instead of Starksboro, because it's more accessible, and a lot of that planning where you'd have the teachers and the students and the community members and doing all of this, it's like there kind of needs to be a goal that we've agreed upon before that. But to do all of that work on 5 different scenarios is a little, I don't know if that's possible. So I'm really grateful that you put this plan forward, and I'm glad that we're talking about it. And I look forward to hearing everybody's thoughts, and it's just so much. There's so much to process that I'm glad that we're starting to do it. Thanks.
Thanks, Liz. Sarah LaPearl.
I got involved in a lot of, I somehow ended up on Act 46 committee, and I really didn't understand a lot about school governance, what was going on, and it really didn't take me but several meetings to understand how school systems were set up and run in Vermont, and that they were rather inefficient, antiquated, and I saw an opportunity in how unifying it would be. And I had to have all of us come together and not have 7 or 8 school boards. And, Act 46 was set up to be really a school governance shift for the state. And while it might have we'll never know really how much money we saved, but like our goal wasn't ever for it to be some massive cost savings, but for us to have this like safety net and work together. And I have always felt really optimistic about where we were going. And I feel, and I've really been someone who really goes back to build it and they will come. And I like a lot of aspects of this proposal because I think when I look at all the options, it really seems like it meets a lot of the outcomes we're looking for in a lot of the best ways that we can. And when I get a little sad because I don't know why the question, and I just want to ask it, like, why is it better to go to school in your own town? Like, what is so important about that? Like, that part of it, I'm like, why don't we just want to have, like, I have also done a ton of my own research and I did write a piece for being on the facilities committee about just a town perspective of it. And what I saw about the research for the towns, a lot of it came down to how the towns responded and how they worked together and created something, and less about what they've taken away, terrible, don't move here, more about look at what we're building, like even little things to work on with a proposal. Maybe it doesn't get to be called Bristol Elementary School and Moncton Elementary School and things like that, and Mount Abe. Like, you have to rebrand. You've got to build stuff up, like kind of what Liz was saying, and just a marketing and a building together and a growing together. And I just like the thought of creating like these stronger, it feels like walls, like which to me is ironic. Like, I don't, just coming out of the last administration, like there's fear, and there's, I don't know, like just that whole aspect of it is very sad to me, when I'd love to find what are all the really good things about this proposal. And I do agree, we have to start with something, and I'm willing to look at other ideas, but I feel that we need to find a way to come together and not block everything, but really actually try to find some peace and some good in some of this stuff. And I need people to really think about, what is it? Not transportation, not there's so much of this is problems that we need to solve, not that we can avoid. Like, there's a cost to living in a beautiful rural place, and that is it's far to go. There's a cost to having 4 children. They're always in a different place. Like, there's a cost to so many wonderful things that we have, and we need to itemize what are those problems and solve those problems, and do it in the best way that we can. So I really would like, I'm still back on us coming together and building something, and I do not ever want to knock the education that my children had in this process. So that is extremely important to me, but it is also the outcomes for them at all levels is also very important to me, and all their, like, just the ability to make more friends is too inviting, versus keeping them contained. I can't honestly think of anything worse than having them stay in a K-8 little school. So I don't think I would have gone for that. But those are my thoughts on this proposal. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. Krista?
Sorry, and sorry also for my lack of video. It's frustrating. Anyway, I like a lot of aspects of this proposal. And then there are a couple of questions and concerns I have, and I appreciate that this is an iterative process where we're maybe have the opportunity to go back to the drawing board on different parts of it. You know, one thing that I am a little bit concerned about is one aspect of equity for kids from lower income families, and the value of a really proximate school to those families. And I think that's something we should think about when we think about which schools we're considering possibly closing or repurposing. I do worry some about the ability to be involved for folks at different income levels, the ability to be involved in their kids' education and have a sense of agency and ability to participate. I think it's really different. I think for myself and other folks who are in the upper middle class zone, I think we can get what we need for our kids and we can travel to do it. And I don't think everybody's in that same boat. So I do think that's a piece as far as looking at schools that we consider closing, that if we do need to do that, that we think about that piece of equity along with all the other pieces. So I just wanted to raise that particular point.
Okay, thank you. And Hannah, do you have another comment you want to make? Or is that your hand from before?
Yeah. I was gonna agree with my mom on what she just said. I think that's a really good point. And I would also just say, as a current student at Mount Abe and having these hard conversations, and there being a lot of people who don't want to close their town schools, and because of that, I mean, for me, it's like, people are saying, oh, I don't want to close my town schools, so it wouldn't be the end of the world if we possibly close Mount Abe. And for me, as a student who's been going to Mount Abe for 3 years now, I would just say that the impact of closing Mount Abe to me would be, I mean, it's a big one, because for me, like, as a 7th grader, you go there and you feel, especially for the first couple weeks, you feel pretty small, like a small fish in a big pond from being, the oldest at your elementary school. And I remember just being like, oh my gosh, like there are so many people that are older than me, and this is crazy and kind of overwhelming. And then I got the opportunity to do the fall musical, and that's like anyone in all grades can audition for that. And I got to work with people from all grades and get to know upperclassmen, and one of my best friends actually I met through Newsies in 7th grade. And I think it's just another aspect of I have so many friends from all grades, because you get chances to do the musical and really mingle with other upperclassmen and other people. I met a lot of new people from other towns because I came to Mount Abe and just sat down at a random table with people I recognized from elementary school soccer. And so I think it would just be a really big impact if we were to lose that sense of community that I feel, and that sense of belonging. And with town schools being the ones who are oh, we might have to close this school, that's hard. But I also think that people shouldn't be as quick to say, oh, let's just close Mount A, because it's had a really big impact on me. So, yeah.
Thank you, Hannah. Andrew.
Sure. So I've written some thoughts down here that I'm reading off my iPad that I've been thinking about since Patrick's proposal. You know, for the last couple of weeks, I've also been thinking a lot about what my role is on the board, and actually I have done a sort of gone down the rabbit hole with reading about delegate versus trustee representation in a democracy, and reading about James Madison's writing of the Bill of Rights and how he used both styles. Federalist 10. I read a case study of a school board in Pennsylvania and their use of delegate versus trustee leadership. So I went down a rabbit hole just really trying to think about this in the context of the community who I'm hearing say, don't do this, but how much of that is a majority of the community? How much of that is a vocal minority of the community? And so it's helped me shape my thinking about what I'm here to do in my individual role, which really is a primary focus and a narrow focus on outcomes and equity for students. And that means that I'm not focused on people's property values. I'm not focused on whether we're creating, maintaining, or destroying community. Community is very important. I don't disagree with that. But for me, that seems outside of the purview of our role or my role on how I'm thinking about my role on the board, which is what is best for the kids. And so in thinking about delegate representation, that delegate meaning basically I vote in whichever way my town, the electorate says I should vote. And trustee being, they may say one way, but I have an informed idea about how we should go about that. I've been thinking a lot about how that balances out. And really the hybrid model of delegate and trustee representation is that the constituents are folks who put us in office have said we really ultimately have these values about what we want to see happen. And we want kids to learn, and we want them to have a great academic experience and a social emotional learning experience. And that by listening and honoring that, I am listening to the voter. And that when it comes to how we make that happen at the board level, and then through our hired consultant, our superintendent, that we use trustee representation. So I think about what, from my informed stance, having been on the board for a long time, it's not information that other people can't understand. It's just by virtue of experience and us doing this for 4 hours out of whack every time we get together, you learn some things that other folks don't know. That really what I'm in support of is anything that achieves those equity and outcomes. And thus far, you know, Patrick has put forth a plan that we asked him to come up with. We asked for a plan and he's given us one. And thus far, I think it achieves that, or appears to do so. And I think we're going to have more conversation about that. So I'm in support of any plan, which is currently the one Patrick has put forth, because it supports equity and outcomes. One of the things that I think we don't really talk about concretely is the issue of economic privilege. I'm pretty well aware that most of us on the Zoom call and people who can attend these meetings are relatively privileged in that we can be here and we're not working at Hannaford's or we're not working second shift as an LNA someplace. And that there is a voice and there is an experience of a lot of folks who we don't ever hear from. So during the pandemic, you know, I could go remote and work as a therapist online, and then structure my schedule so that I could support my daughter doing long division and the Khan Academy app and whatever they needed to bolster and supplement whatever they weren't getting at school. I was available to do with a $500 iPad and a MacBook and all the resources available that they would need. Not everyone has that. And my concern is that if we leave things as they are, that we continue to stretch less and less staffing over the same number of schools. The kids who don't come from backgrounds where the parents can rework their schedule for tomorrow if they need to be attentive to their child's needs, those kids are going to fall through the cracks. So in my mind, that's what I'm focused on, is what's going to be best for the kids. And if that means keeping schools exactly as is, I support that. If that means repurposing, I support that. If it means going to the voters and saying we want to close schools and ask them to do that, I support that. And I support it also because we've not heard any other viable alternative to Patrick's plan thus far. You know, a lot of impassioned emails, a lot of people who have very strong opinions about it. I respect it. I understand why they're coming from that place. But a lot of the things I'm hearing are very vague. They're not specific. They're not actionable. They don't provide us a viable alternative. And I think we all wish that this was not the proposal we had to contend with, that we have a stable school system with, you know, stable enrollment numbers or even increasing, right? That we have the opposite problem. Where do we put all these kids that we've got? But that's not the reality. And I think we have to be really just honest about where we're at, and that things can't look like they have in the past. So.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Kevin?
My previous life involved consolidation, and I was the one that hired the moving truck and the contractors and all that kind of stuff. And it was all under the guise of maintaining product viability and efficiency. And I look at where we're at, and a lot of my experiences may seem cold-hearted, but I'm as has been said before, and I'll echo it. I think we really need to focus on student outcomes and not the whims and wishes of adult for some sort of resistance to change, of change and whatnot. So we need to, you know, get class sizes, groups, support functions together in a way that's economical and can be effectively supporting people. You know, there's concerns raised about grade schools and the amount of cuts that this proposal makes. But on the other hand, there's not a lot of conversation about bringing students together in a more, and I hate to use the word efficient, but more effective environment. And, you know, grouping 3 grades together and underneath one teacher is like, each grade in an elementary school, in my opinion, is an eternity. And to do that to kids just to save a distributed model of schools, as opposed to regrouping so that classes and the specials and the supports can all be done more effectively is not where I want to go. You know, I've said it before, and I'm maintaining it. I'm using Patrick's proposal as a baseline. It hits all the points that we have concerns about, and I'm open to something that improves on that. But I haven't seen it. I've seen a lot of emotion. I haven't seen much or anything that's constructive, and anything that is constructive is short of the goal by several magnitudes. So I'm intrigued that we're continuing to look. Quite honestly, I don't hold out a lot of hope. And I'm insulated too, by the way, because I'm in Bristol, and it's not my town school that's being affected, but I can see certain schools where it's like a 10-minute drive to one of these, Moncton or Bristol, from the village centers and whatnot, and that's time, but it's not significant time. I see other aspects where there's geography that bothers me a little bit. But all in all, I think we have to look at the whole package, if you will, and look at it holistically from the point of view of what's best for the district.
Okay, thank you. Sarah McLean.
Yeah, I just want to say that I really appreciate the growth mindset that Liz and Sarah highlighted. It's very hopeful, and I really appreciate that that perspective. You know, obviously, I live in Lincoln, and Lincoln has been a really present voice since December 7th. And although, you know, we can write off the many responses to the recommendation as emotional, I think that there's real value in that correspondence. We have asked the community to engage, and they are engaged. And there is value in the emotion. There is value in the qualitative assets that these schools have to their communities. And as much as I would also like to see, and I think this does happen when we get to middle school and high school, the walls, as Sarah was saying, are tumbled, you know, they fall down, and then we are one community. And I think Patrick's question earlier of what are we as a community without the unifying force that is Mount Abraham? And also speaking to Krista's point about equity, I think I would love for us to have a conversation about what we mean by equity. We throw this term around a lot. We talk about equity and outcomes. Then you could ask the question, what is the equity in taking a child out of an elementary school that is highly functioning to another elementary school? The survey shows, I haven't spent a lot of time with it, but one of the graphs that I think I understand is saying that, you know, that it's the lowest income bracket has the highest support of their town schools. And I mention that because I feel like we often work under the assumption that we're hearing from a vocal, privileged, wealthy minority. And the survey tells a different story. So I look forward to digesting that a bit more. And also, I hope we talk about later when we're talking about the survey, seeing the comments that people wrote in the margins, because I understand there were many, and I think that also adds another touch point for us to consider. And I also want us to consider what are the economic and community fallouts for closing a well-functioning town school. You know, I've done research too, and, you know, we all, you know, you can find what you're looking for, I guess, but there are communities in our country that are just now feeling it with COVID, or that have been feeling it for a while with declining enrollment and increasing costs. And the communities are crumbling. And although that may not be what our exact charge is, I think we need to consider that, because our students are our community, our families are our community. We are nothing without our community. So just wanted to voice all that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Rob, before I go to you, I want to check in with some board members we haven't heard from. So I don't think we've heard from Caleb or Steve or Kristen Blanchett. So I don't know if one of you has any comments you want to make.
Yeah, I have a comment.
Sure.
Yeah, so just kind of thinking about reaction to the December 7th proposal generally, I too felt that I felt appreciative of the specificity offered by the proposal. I was not surprised to have a recommendation to close elementary schools. I was surprised to, as you all know, with the recommendation to have the innovation sites, because they seem to, that part of the proposal to me really does not, for me, jive with the just articles of agreement. And so I want us to pursue well, I want us to ask for the town permissions fundamentally. The reason that I think that's important is that I believe I'm the only member of one of the old Starksboro or Lincoln boards still on this board. And so just speaking from that, those two towns specifically, we voted our budgets from the floor. And that was a really important tradition. Sometimes in Starksboro, while I was there, we, budgeted extra money for our support staff in some years, so it was a tool that for some was frustrating because they wanted all Australian ballot, but it really drove a lot of participation at the meeting, and it had often symbolic, but I think meaningful adjustments were done to our budget on the floor. And to give that up was a big deal. That was probably the biggest deal for people from Starksboro. As their representative, that's what I was hearing at the time. And I supported the proposal to merge. And stood up and said, here's why I think you should give up that right, as well as other controls. And part of that was that, I believed that Act 46 compelled this action and that our district was better served to move ahead. And I also said, I've been a part of this study committee and we've put certain safeguards in place because we understand that this is a coming together that is unfamiliar and anxiety producing for some. And so the sort of plain English reading that we won't close your elementary school without your permission was really core. Steve Stitzel, our attorney at the time, described it as bedrock to our founding agreement. And so I agree with so much of what I've heard people say here tonight, but I sometimes feel like we gloss by this part where maybe we have to ask permission, maybe we don't. I would never suggest that we could not operate Mount Abe without a 5-town vote. We have to have a 5-town vote to do that. We have to have the permission of the Agency of Education. The same is true for merging. If we wanted to merge with Virgins, that requires a 5-town vote. These are statutorily guaranteed rights. I think the right to a town vote to close elementary schools is just as legally enshrined and just as kind of unassailable. I think it is evident to me that we didn't secure a legal opinion about the legality of this repurposing proposal just by the fact that we didn't engage our traditional attorney and found out only after the proposal that they had to conflict out. Now we have a new attorney who has given us some advice in the public record that's then subsequently been walked back, and we've been told we can hear their real opinion only in executive session. So it's a challenging dynamic. I would just say nothing that I've heard from that person makes me think in the public comment that we did here that I everything that I've heard, it doesn't make me think that we have any less obligation in that area. I do think that this type of repurposing amounts to closure. I think if you were moving one grade or something like that, it wouldn't. But I think in this case, it does. The last thing I'll say is that personally, I think it would be better to fully close elementary schools. We're talking about consolidating teachers, consolidating services. I think to have these two outlier schools with innovation sites would be not productive long-term. It's just more spread out dollars I'd like to bring under one roof. Even with these consolidation proposals, we still have room in the building. So I think we still have room for innovation sites under the same roofs. I really would like to see this board ask all of our towns to close their schools because we might only get one yes. We might get 2 yeses. But if we did that, we fully closed those schools, I think we'd realize greater savings. And if it still wasn't enough, then we could look at tuitioning out Mount Abe. That's not something I would take lightly. But I will say that if Patrick asked the question, if we didn't have Mount Abe, what keeps us together? I would say that in that hypothetical situation, one thing that might keep us together is we have 3 or 4 or 5 elementary schools where we are really trying to bring more comprehensive services under the same roof, maybe expanded childcare and pre-K, maybe expanded access to health services. I think that there's a lot of momentum in those directions. Maybe the other thing that brings us together is we ask permission to designate 3 public schools. You know, maybe Middlebury couldn't take all our students, but if we did get an accommodation where it wasn't just open tuition, but we said we're designating CVU and Virgins and Middlebury, the fact that our district would have that kind of choice would be identifying. It would be a differentiator, and it could be part of a district brand that we share because our 5 towns have chosen to undertake something like that. Just to close, and thank you for hearing me out, because I know I've said some of this before. I think we should have the faith in the plan that we choose, and that we should ask for every possible permission that could possibly be legally construed as required, because without buy-in and without trust, then I think no plan can succeed. And I think with trust, our voters understand the really hard place that we're in, and we won't. I think that ultimately we will get the concessions that we need at the times that we need them, and that just trusting and asking for more permission rather than less is just the way to go. So I think I've heard a lot of things to support that. I really appreciate everybody in this group and all the work that our staff puts in, and it's just a tremendous lift. But that's what I've been thinking ever since December 7th. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Caleb. Steve.
So I've been since December 7th just trying to work the problem in my head, and starting from, is the problem well defined? You know, is the risk, has the risk been adequately defined? And I'm satisfied that it is. We have to make assumptions about, you know, what's going to happen in the future. Declining enrollment looks to be the most likely scenario. We could be saved by folks coming from New Jersey or by Montpelier writing us a check, or other things going much better than we think they're going to. But I think our role as a board is to understand what's the likely risk and have a plan for that. So I think what's been outlined by Patrick as the likely scenario is the responsible scenario to apply a plan to. And if we take that and we say, what are these schools going to look like FY23 through FY26, taking that likely scenario into account, we're going to have declining enrollment. Those schools are going to each year have fewer and fewer and fewer kids. Lincoln next year is going to close a classroom because they don't have enough kids. So if we don't have a plan, if we don't do anything, which is what I've been saying all along, you know, if you're not going to vote for a plan, what are you voting for instead? So we have fewer and fewer kids in these schools, and we obviously, because of that, need to cut costs and cut staff. And by looking at what those cuts look like from a staffing level in not just 26, but in 23, what I see in front of us is not education. I see crisis management. My wife works as a social emotional, you know, interventionist at her school. I hear the stories of what daily crisis management is all about, and without proper supports and proper staffing at these schools, you know, if you pack 24, 25 kids into a couple of classrooms with the teachers doing everybody's jobs, that's not education, that's crisis management. That's not something you're going to attract people from outside. They're not going to come to your school and ask to speak to the principal, and hey, well, they only show up on Wednesday. Oh, and there's you know, and the teacher does most of the nursing work here at your school. Those aren't attractive attributes for, potential families as well. And obviously there's been no appetite for paying for all of this, to maintain all these supports that we can see in the survey. So we don't even need to talk about, what lots of extra taxes would mean to people coming to town. I don't think that's really going to be supported anyway. So we have to have a plan. And right now, as other folks have noted, at the moment, I've been struggling since December 7th, trying to come up with another plan. And I've heard different things, the K-8 scenario where we closed on Abe, let's rent out all of our empty space. There's a couple other ones that, with really just a little napkin work, you can pretty much see that you're not going to come up with the magnitude of savings that really needs to happen for us to maintain our current level of school support for each of the classes. So I see Patrick's plan as something that does hit, it does require staffing reductions, but those staff are able to operate in a much tighter circle, and they can offer that support to children under fewer roofs, which only makes sense. Is it something that's really palatable to everybody? No, I don't think anybody here on this call feels excited about the prospects of what we're talking about here, but I'm really interested in what other alternatives there might be to this plan, and lacking anything else, I'm struggling to find something that actually works. Emotional baggage or equity baggage or anything else aside, I'm looking for a nuts and bolts solution that actually works. And maybe other folks have that. I went through the exercise, as you know, of trying to look at this from a completely different point of view and saying, well, what if we really push all of our resources to the elementary schools and let the chips fall where they may at the upper level? And it's a stretch. You might be able to pull it off by that, from what I can see from that exercise, but you're doing a lot of damage to the middle schoolers and the high school kids. And I still think you end up with a system that doesn't equitably serve everybody and carry our board responsibilities to provide a robust educational experience to all grades all the way through to the end. I think the merger with Virgins is a great idea. I think we're going to get a middle school facility that we wanted out of our bond vote for the cost of a 2003 bond that somebody else paid for, and they finished paying off half of it. And we only have to pay half of that principal and interest going forward. And we're going to have the middle schoolers will have a whole building to themselves. The trip from, wherever they're coming from now to get to Virgins is a bit longer, but it's not really much any different than the kids in the Middlebury district have to travel to go from Ripton to Middlebury or Shoreham to Middlebury. There's other districts, as in the Hardwood district and the Chittenden East district, where kids have similar bus rides to their high schools. I think we can handle that. And obviously there's the cost savings out of central office, which I think are real, as opposed to our past merger where we really weren't doing much of a merger. This is a real district merger with real administrative savings. So I I think from a nuts and bolts standpoint, the problem is real. I think the solution is viable, and I look forward to hearing other options if they arise. Thank you.
Yeah. Dave, I do see your hand up, but I haven't heard from Kristen or Annie yet, so I want to hear from them first. So Kristen?
Okay, so to me, I mean, equity means a lot of stuff. It means the kids can have the same stuff. But next year will be my 10th year on the board. And the whole time we've been trying to work on meeting the needs of students who chronically are not meeting proficiency standards, which are generally IEP and free and reduced lunch students. That's the nut we have to try to crack. We've been trying to crack it for 10 years and we haven't. You know, every other Sunday night I do a Zoom with some friends of mine from high school, and they live all over the country: Michigan, Florida, California, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, me, Vermont. And I said I've sort of posed to them our issue, and I said, would any of you want to send your kids to a school that had 40 students in it? And they said, is that a serious question? I mean, they're from bigger places. So I don't think that getting that small, we can meet the needs of chronically not meeting proficiency standard students. Now, today I worked in a school with 430 students, and the IEP students and the kids who aren't even on IEPs, but in that zone between of not being proficient, but they can't qualify for anything, they get basically the same services that the IEP students get, because they tuck them into groups, because they have big numbers. And I would hope that we could do that here. I don't know if we do that here now. We might do that some. I know we have Title I, right? Which I don't know if they have Title I there. On Thursday, I'll go to a school that has 240 kids. And then on Friday, I'll be at a school that has 380 kids. And those schools have identity, and they have teachers who care and know everybody's name and all that kind of stuff. So another silly story, probably because it's late. So when I was in college, I figured out that if I did all my research for a paper and I slept for 3 hours, I could wake up and write the paper better than if I did it before I slept for 3 hours. It was this weird thing. And I keep hoping that will happen for this, and it's not happening for me or anyone else, obviously. We're still problem solving, and I'm glad we're going to get more information. And again, I want us to focus on the kids that are chronically not meeting proficiency standards and trying to not just help them, we have to help every student reach their potential. And there are students who need enrichment to reach their potential. And so how can we best do that? How can we best help, again, the kids that aren't quite on IEPs and aren't quite on 504s reach their potential? And I don't think the answer is by going thin. And I guess that's all I'll say right now. I do think we need to take into consideration, and I've said this before, what people in towns think, certainly. But again, I really appreciate what Andrew said, that the kids are our focus, and we might have to take heat from other constituencies in order to focus on what will be best for students and reaching their potential and lifting more kids into the proficiency range. So thank you.
Okay, and Annie Denny, where did you go? Oh, Annie?
I'm here. I'm not sure that I have anything new to add, to be honest. I feel like everything that I've been thinking about has been said by someone else already. I kind of have mixed feelings about the whole thing, because I feel like I feel like it's an impossible situation all the way around. I feel like it's a no-win situation no matter what, and I'm trying really hard to listen to all sides of it and kind of absorb all of the opinions. And it's a lot to think about, it's a lot to process, and I don't think that there is a right answer. I don't think that there is any one best way to do this. And I think that no matter what happens and no matter how this pans out, there are people who are going to be upset. And I think that we have to figure out what makes the most sense financially and educationally, and what makes the most sense for the majority of the people, and then hope for the best.
Thank you. Okay, and now I think everybody's had a chance. And so Rob had his hand up, and then Dave for a second comment.
Yeah, thanks. The anticipation of the last 2 months has been building. I appreciate everyone's insight and thoughts. A couple things in response to Andrew and Kevin and sort of Steve's point in regards to seeing a different proposal that might, nuts and bolts or meet all the tallies. I don't know if we've honestly asked for that from folks, and I hope that as a board we do move forward in asking, but then in an asking, trying to set people up so that their proposal isn't something pie in the sky, that it's actually framed and grounded. I don't know what that would look like, but so that if they do come forward with something, that it's something that we could possibly work with or chew on or something like that. So I hope folks that are on the call, will maybe step to the plate in those regards. And then I guess to a question that was asked about town schools. My mom taught, she was a special educator in Homer Community School, which was a town school in Southern Michigan for 35 years. And in the letter that we got from the Robinson staff reminded me a lot of, reflecting on her career as a special educator in a really, small, but also a town school in Southern Michigan. And there's that, the idea of craft knowledge that you develop over, your career, whether it be as an educator or whatever. It's just being able to do your craft better because you've done it for longer, the 10,000 hour rule sort of thing. But then I reflect on my mom, and what I saw in that letter too is it's not just the craft of teaching, right? Of meeting a learner where they're at and meeting their needs as a learner. A true educator meets that kiddo at where they at as a human being. And when you're in a town school and you know the town, you can really know where that child is coming from. And when they walk in your classroom, you can meet them as a person, and you can make sure that their social and emotional needs are met, because you know who they are, you know the community that they're coming from. And then that allows them to meet that level of academic excellence, or that allows them. And so I saw that in that the Robinson staff letter, that just sort of echoed the importance of that school in that town, that those faculty and staff and support staff and everyone in that building meet those kids where they're at as individuals to start, and then serve them to the level we want them to serve them as learners, because they know who they are. So I don't know if Sarah, if that answers your question, but this back and forth between small schools or town schools, and yes, Bristol and Moncton, we're all going to have small schools. I don't disagree with that, but I think there's a different distinction there when it comes to town schools versus small schools, because we have town schools, and yes, they are small. But again, I just reflect on the fact that I think that it's a huge asset for our 5-town community that we have 5-town elementary schools. And by no means am I just saying, close Mount Abe. I'm just saying, as a building, Mount Abe needs a lot of work. And I think that's something we should really think about when we look at this proposal or any proposal moving forward. Like, are we willing to continue to spend, $2.5 million in the next year and a half, or possibly 2 years on a roof and electrical, and think about that as we move forward too. So thank you all for sharing. And Andrew, I'm going to send you an email. I'd love to hear some of your sources there in regards to the delegate and the trustee and some of the readings you did. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Rob. And Dave.
Thank you. To a comment regarding what Rob just said about the culture and the staff at the Robinson School. In the past, the Bristol School has been a pretty rough and tumble school, and I wonder the advisability of putting students from schools that have a really high functioning cultural environment that I believe exists in Lincoln and Starksboro into a school that may have sort of a rough and tumble culture, and what does that do for kids falling through the cracks? And then more to the point of Kristen's comments, if we had all the money in the world, would we just continue doing what we're doing? Because we're not, although Vermont, compared to the rest of the states in the country, does a very good job. We're always close to the top 5, sometimes second or third best state in the country, but that's maybe not saying too much. We graduate the highest percentage of kids out of high school of any state in the country, or we may be second to Massachusetts at this point, but have among the lowest number of kids that seek education beyond high school, whether that's a welding certificate or a PhD, and we have way too many kids fall through the cracks. So if we had all the money in the world, how would we design our school system differently than we do now to address those issues that Kristen brought up? Because they are real. And these are kids that need our attention and support if we expect them to grow up to be the successful contributing citizens in our county, in our state, in our country that we hope for them to be. And I don't know whether all the talk so far has been, around we're doing this to save money, or we're doing this to pick the right buildings. The discussion should be, in my view, around what is the best structure of our school district to do a better job for our children. And if it costs the same amount, so be it. Let's go ask the taxpayers for that amount of money. I just think we ought to start from a place of saying, what's the best school system for our children? And rather than how are we going to use this building or what's going to save us the most money. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dave. Krista.
Thanks. I'm not sure I'm going to be articulate enough because I'm finding myself getting a little bit emotional. It really troubles me to hear folks talking about some of our schools being more highly functional than others. I feel like that, to me, speaks of privilege, and it speaks from a place of not recognizing why we have really different circumstances in our different communities. And I would wonder if in Lincoln, for example, if we had more kids on free and reduced lunch and more rental apartments and more kids on IEPs, what would that education look like? Like, let's really dig down into what makes a school great and what the capacity is in a community to contribute to that. And to say that you would be taking kids out of one great school and putting them into a lesser school sounds a lot to me like, I believe in equity, but not at the cost of my own experience or my own kids' experience. It sounds to me a lot like not in my backyard. And, you know, I think we may not have as much racial diversity in Vermont, but we have a lot of economic diversity. And we're here to really make sure that we're serving all of our kids in the best possible way. So to start putting one school above the other in terms of what it has and doesn't have, to me, completely misses the point. And I think, you know, we should have talks about equity if that's how folks feel. And I think it's really unfortunate.
Okay. Thank you, Krista. We are almost at our time for the night, and we've still got a lot more to go as far as what was planned on the agenda. I think this conversation was very valuable because we haven't had a chance to hear each other's thoughts. We've had a chance to hear each other ask questions, but we haven't really had a chance to hear each other's thoughts. So I think it was very useful. I myself feel like for planning purposes, it helped a lot because now I kind of know where everybody is. And when we were planning for this meeting, I wasn't sure I knew where everybody was. So I feel it's been useful in that way. What do you want to do about the rest of the agenda? Is there some things that you want to just keep going, or are you feeling like, you know, you can't go any longer kind of thing? I need to kind of have your pulse to know how to continue.
I move we adjourn.
Well, we do have to determine if we're going to adjourn. We have to determine when we're going to deal with the rest of the stuff. Andrew?
I was going to say that the conversation about the survey and the results from that, it feels like that's probably a 2-hour conversation at least. And I think if we've decided to give ourselves 7 months to really understand this more deeply, we should not try to rush that tonight and give ourselves some time to really look at that as well.
Okay. So what we could do is move that to the March special meeting, but the other, and that's an action item later to sort of determine the agenda items. So we could move that, unless Rob and Krista, you just want some clarity of stuff they want you to work on maybe, and then come prepared at the March meeting. I'm going to look to you two because you've been combing through that survey information, and in our discussion we said let's not comb through it all till we know what the board's priorities are around the information, knowing that it's one source of information, it's not the only source of information. So if there are some items about that you have priority, Kevin?
There was a letter from somebody from, I think they were from Moncton, I can't remember the name of the person, who had quite a bit to say. I mean, a lot of people have had quite a bit to say about the survey, but she brought up several specific points that I think would merit some discussion.
That was Joan
Yeah.
Holloway. She's a CPA, so she knows a lot about that stuff. Right?
Yeah, you're right.
I think
Don,
I'm wrong when I think her primary concern was that we hadn't accommodated people who didn't respond to something as a percentage of some of the questions.
Yeah, one of her points was on the income question, there was more people that didn't respond, and all of a sudden we're showing this chart with percentages of incomes when the biggest category, if you will, was no response. But I think, to me, it'd be nice to have some clarification on her points and just leave and let the committee take a stab at it.
Okay. Sarah, did you have something? Yeah, I just had a question. Is the March meeting, so the election is the beginning of March?
Yes.
And so is the special March meeting the first meeting that the new collective board will all be a part of? I think I need a calendar. I think that's when so the 2nd is town meeting and the 9th would be yes. And we may have to combine some sort of reorganization piece in that as well, because we can't meet without reorganizing, and the reorganization meeting is the following week. So maybe we should switch and do the reorganization the week after, and maybe we should consider that. Caleb.
Yeah, and maybe this is just picking up on what you just said, Dawn. I was kind of thinking, I was wanting to reinforce Andrew's point that this is probably a 2-hour discussion, and it probably warrants a fresher 2 hours than could begin right now. Having another special meeting would be hard at this point, but I think maybe Sarah's point that it could be hard for some brand new board members to fully absorb some of this. Maybe if we were to have maybe a special meeting is out of the question because there's only so many days, but even if it was just a tight 2 hours just on this topic, it could be helpful. I want to hear what Chris and Rob have to say as well, but I think it would it would be nice to have just like a fresh meeting for that.
I don't know.
Do you want me to jump in, Rob, or do you want to? Maybe we can tag team. Well, so to Joan's comments, she had some really good suggestions for what we might do to clean up some of the data. I think what Rob and I were trying to figure out is what we'd really like to hear from folks is what are you most interested in looking at, so that we can focus on that level of detail when we talk about the survey. So we have all of the data right now, minus the comments. But from what we have, is there, beyond those comments from Joan, is there anything else that you'd like to focus on, since especially if we're going to have, a limited amount of time? What's most valuable, so what are the questions that you most want to have answered from that survey? And maybe that's something you could send to us outside of right now. And then to the point about the comments, what we've done is we've gone through and removed anything where there was a specific name reference. What we promised folks was anonymity in their response. So in some of the comments, people posted letters that were on Front Porch Forum. If they did that, that was submitted publicly. So we believe we can share that out. This comments will be in a different order from the other data. So it wouldn't be possible for someone to link a comment to the original data set. Otherwise, if there's anything else that's potentially identifiable, for example, I was a bus driver in Moncton for 10 years, we'll also remove that, and we'll say if it's been removed, name removed or potentially identifiable information removed. So that's kind of the protocol we were following with the comments. But if, we've been taking it really slow because we just want to make sure that we share it in the way that everybody feels is appropriate. So I guess that's where we're at with the comments, and then with the survey overall, sharing back in whatever ways are most useful to you guys. We'd love to know what your key questions are. Again, we have all the information there, but we can try to make it a little more concise when we meet again.
So Andrew has his hand up.
So I was just thinking, Krista, if you remember the sections in peer review journal articles where there's all the data and how they came about it, and then there's the analysis, and then there's the discussion section. the discussion and what this means. And I was just sort of thinking about that, like we've got lots of data and sort of getting super granular about it probably just gets us even farther in the weeds. And I'm wondering, is there a way, and this may be a lot for you and Rob to do, but to really just sort of put it into narrative form? Is there a story to be told? You know, either by town or by economic group, or what sort of extract from that what the story is and what we should be taking from that from a higher level point of view. And then obviously, like a lot of studies, there's limitations. What is the limitation to the data that we have? I don't know if that's a helpful way of thinking about that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. I think about some of the, like the second half of the presentation, those slides did provide some of that. So maybe we could even start there with, but in a more narrative way, because we could very easily get mired in, not that all the data isn't important, but forget about what key questions we're hoping to get answered.
Because when I was reading through it, I was like, it seems like there's a story, but you know, I want to see if everyone else was seeing that story. Sort of like, so folks don't want to raise taxes that much. They don't want to close schools, and they don't want educational staffing changes. So it looks like everyone wants sort of things as status quo, but I think there was a lot of data in there, and I was trying to hop through all the pages and see if that story was in there or what other story I was missing. So.
Okay. And Kristen Blanchett.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as Joan pointed out, it's important to know how many people answered that question or didn't. And so making sure all the information is there for each question, so there's context. And you know, did the rural studies place, did they say how statistically significant any of the data is? Did they say that it is statistically significant in any way? Or is it just a snapshot? Because what you can have is either a survey that's statistically significant or just a snapshot. And then that determines how much weight you give to the information. Do you know what I mean? So if they're studying to see if Tylenol stops headaches, they're going to have statistically significant information so they can say, yes, use Tylenol to do this. Or anyway, you know what I mean? So what
Yes.
do we have? And so how much weight should we put on the information we get and even the narrative we make if it's a snapshot versus like statistically significant?
Right. And they did provide some of that for us as well.
But have we seen, is that in the information?
Yep. Yeah, it's in the presentation. I think it's noted on certain slides where information is where the data is statistically, that's so hard to say, but where it is statistically.
And I haven't looked at it closely, but because like I said, snapshots are good too, but they're not as informative, right? And I'm sorry, because when you did that one, I was like 20 minutes late. I missed the first 20 minutes of that. So I'll go back and look at it. But if you guys need help with that, I have some experience with that sort of thing. So if you need an extra person helping.
Okay, thank you, Kristen. Liz.
Yeah, that's all I was going to offer. And I'm sorry for not offering earlier. If you need help with that, that's obviously a ton of work. Like, I would encourage you guys to reach out to us. I'd be happy to help as well.
Okay. And Andrew, do you have another question, or is that your hand?
Just as a comment, you know, if you have the time as board members, maybe jump back and take a look at the survey just to refresh and see like, oh, actually, I'd love to see the answer to that question or that question, you know, because the deep dives really are on town, income, and age demographics. Those are where we can get a little bit deeper dives in regards to questions, but that's where I start. And then just email Krista and I, and we will do our darndest to get something to you well before that meeting, so it's not the first time you also see it too. that sound good, Krista?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so it sounds like we need to table the survey results discussion to a later date, and we'll figure out how we're going to do that. They have some information to go on. We have 3 action items, all of which, well, two we might be able to resolve quickly, and 1 needs a little more discussion around additional questions to direct the superintendent to answer. I had really gathered all the board individual questions, and there are like 3, almost 4 pages of them. So I originally was going to read you all of them and then have us group together, but I don't think we have the time at this time to do that. So given that, I think we can table that item. If we could decide when we want to invite the board council to join us in executive session. Is that something you want at the next one of these meetings, these extra meetings, or do you want it after a regular meet, at the end of a regular meeting? You want it next month? Do you want it the following month?
So just for clear.
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry, Andrew. Go ahead.
Okay. Just for clarification, so what I'm remembering is that the attorney said he had additional information that he could provide us, but he would only do that within executive session, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Kristen?
I think getting the information sooner rather than later, but next month it could be either meeting. I mean, which one would have a lighter agenda where there would be more time?
Yeah, we'll have to look at that, and I don't know what his schedule is. That's the other piece we'll have to work. So,
but I would go for sooner rather than later.
I did, in anticipation of this conversation, I reached out to check availability given the next couple of meetings that were scheduled. And he can join us on the 23rd or the 9th. Those were the 2 dates I checked because they were the next 2 on the calendar. I realize there's some moving parts there now, but for what it's worth.
So the 23rd meeting is after our annual meeting, and we don't have a set time for the annual meeting. It just goes till it's done, right? Is that correct? So I'm not sure that the 23rd would probably be the best idea because we're often just waiting. We don't have control over that the annual meeting.
So I would support going for the 9th then and get him booked because I know it's also a scheduling issue.
Is that a motion?
Yes, I motion to have our Bill Moob attend the meeting on, is that March 9th?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Steve? Any discussion? Sarah McLean, or Sarah LaPearl, sorry. We're all jumping around.
Did we just switch which meeting was which, or like, that's all I'm just clarifying. Is that now our reorganizational meeting?
I don't think it'll matter which meeting it is. We'll just schedule in the bill at that time, because that's the.
Okay.
And
for what it's worth, I don't think historically the reorganization part of the meeting has taken a long time. There's been a training component to the reorganization meeting lately. So there's some options, I guess, in terms of how the board wants to handle those meetings in March.
Okay. Caleb.
Yeah, just to explain my vote in advance, I still don't want to receive this advice in executive session. The board voted pretty strongly to hear it in open session previously. I know this attorney only wants to operate in executive session now, but I would prefer to receive our legal advice in public, so I will be voting no, given that this motion is pretty explicitly to hear this advice in executive session.
So, and just as a sort of catch up, I know you weren't at the last meeting, Caleb, and he did say what we decide once we hear the information, we could share it in public session, but he wants the opportunity to share it with us in executive session.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, because usually I'm thinking that executive session kind of provides a curtain. So you'd be able to, we can discuss what we hear in that particular executive session.
We could discuss and to decide whether we want to share that when we come out, or
it's a little different than my typical understanding, but I appreciate that. I know I wasn't here last week, but yeah, anyway, I think my point stands, but I do appreciate that.
Okay. Right. So the motion is to invite to invite board counsel to provide an update on the legal opinion at the March 9th meeting. Okay, so Krista.
I approve.
Okay, Sarah McLean.
I'm going to abstain.
Okay, Kristen Blanchett.
Approve.
Rob Buckland.
I'm going to vote no.
James Sharp.
No.
Kevin Hansen.
Yes.
Steve Rooney.
Yes.
Caleb.
No.
Andrew.
Yes.
Liz.
Yes.
Okay. Sarah LaPearl.
Yes.
Annie Denny.
Yes.
8 in favor, 3 opposed, and 1 abstention. So the motion carries. All right. So the last piece of action that we just need to take care of is to have an idea about the agenda items for the next extra meeting. In the agenda, it says 3/9, but if we just plan for our agenda for our next special meeting, and then if we have to switch any dates, I think we'll be covered that way. So currently we have the survey will be on the next agenda. Are there any other? Caleb, is your hand up with okay. Are there any other option? Any other? Do you want to? Oh, sorry. The other thing would be to direct the superintendent to answer additional questions. We could go into that. Save that for the next one. So the survey and then additional questions for information. And we have a request from one of the town groups that would like to come and present their proposal. So I need to get back to them about whether we think we would do that at that next extra meeting. So
I would be in favor of that.
Okay.
Yeah, me too.
Okay. Kristen?
I just wondered if we could get an update on the any sort of proposal to Virgins to start a study committee. Or any other interested parties.
There is some conversation. There's an email going back and forth around people, and I don't have it up right here, but there is some interest, so there may be something to share at that next. Rob.
Yeah, I guess just trying to get some clarity with the process moving forward month after month. You know, if folks do have a proposal that they'd like to bring forth, I guess what would that look like? I mean, are we going to have a special meeting where it's just, you know, an open invite, or I know of this group that would like to present, and I'm sure that there's other folks, whether or not they're, people from the different schools or community members that would like to present. And I guess what's the board's thought around what's that process look like, so we can hear from folks?
Yeah, we have the teachers groups too that thought they wanted to weigh in. So how do we fit them in?
And then Liz.
Okay. Those seem like great things to have our consultant be a part of. So the sooner that we can get rolling with them, I feel like that was the person that we were going to use as a resource to help us navigate the alternatives, as well as the one that we're looking at right now, right? So could he be a part of hearing alternative plans, or she, or whoever it may be?
And Kevin.
I guess I'm a little concerned. I'm certainly open to hearing individuals or groups that have alternative plans, but I'd be really concerned that we don't screen them first. And maybe that's a harsh term, but we don't make a decision on whether they're viable or not first before we start clouding up a consultant with information that I got the impression we're going to try to have them provide us a clean brush stroke of things that hopefully we haven't considered. So my vision is we would take the values matrix or something, hear these proposals and kind of bounce them against that values matrix, and then determine if there's credibility there or not.
And there's a couple of guys out of Starksboro that are finance guys that would like an opportunity to analyze the proposals from a financial perspective.
And Caleb.
Just wanted to second Liz's thought there. I think that DMG weighing in within the study group context would be helpful. And in light of our discussion earlier about operating and tuitioning, with my comments in terms of, I think they could provide some state level expertise there, and it just makes sense that as we're proceeding with the study committee, I think they'd be a good consultant that could help us, answer questions on multiple fronts at once.
Okay.
Dawn?
Yes.
I wonder, I don't want to keep putting folks off. I just wonder if it might be good for us to have a little time to think about the best way to incorporate some of these.
That's what I'm thinking. Like, we sort of need a plan so that we can tell everybody the same thing. And rather than have somebody come and then say, oh, well, wait, we should have done this. I was sitting here thinking we sort of need a plan in place before we have people coming, because we don't want the first person not to have the same opportunities the last person has to bring us an idea, just because we learn as we go, kind of thing. So maybe I'll reach back out to the outside group and ask for a little more time, and then at one of our next meetings, come with some proposals about how we're gonna look at these, or how we're gonna do this. Take outside proposals.
Yeah, I think we almost have to advertise for them. We have to alert people that we're accepting them, set a deadline, say what kind of format we want them in.
Yeah.
Just like an RFP.
Okay, so I think I'll reach back out and just ask them to hold their thoughts because we need a little more time to gather what we need to make it just, to receive them.
I think we shouldn't put them off very long. I mean, I think the most important thing we can do is listen to our local people.
I agree. Listening is very important, but I would rather us be clear about what we're asking for so that everybody has the same opportunity to bring us what we ask. And we haven't really defined what we're asking for yet. So
Dawn, is the thinking that there would be some kind of outreach to the community and saying, we welcome groups, I don't really understand who, but interested parties to present alternative proposals at our April meeting. Each group will be allotted 10 minutes for the proposal and must submit documentation within 7 days prior to the meeting. And then, whatever other criteria, everyone agrees upon. Is that the idea? And if so, I think that's a great way to kind of equalize the playing field. But I do agree with Dave. We got to get to these proposals sooner than later because the clock is ticking. I mean, I know 7 months may seem like a long time, but it's not.
Right. I agree. But I think having a plan in place makes it easier for us and the people coming to us. Okay. So I'll reach back out to the people that reached out to me, but it sounds like the next meeting, the agenda, we're going to spend it on the survey, additional questions that we're going to need answers to as a group, we're going to decide, and then the study committee, and hopefully some sort of framework around other proposals so that we can be ready to go in April. I'm seeing nodding heads, so is that good? Okay. All right. Okay. We don't need an executive session tonight. So, is there any public comment? I'm looking for hands.
Dawn,
Yes.
have a question for you
Sure.
first. Do you need a motion to table the direct superintendent to answer additional board questions since it was listed as an action item?
Okay, I guess we could, yes, take a motion to table the survey, the B and C to the
So moved.
Andrew.
I'll second. Krista?
Krista. Okay. Thanks, Chris, for catching that. It's getting late.
Do you need a vote?
Yes. So, Krista, tabling B and C.
Yes.
Yes. Sarah McLean.
Yes.
Kristen Blanchett. I don't see her. I'm going to keep going. Rob.
Yes.
Okay. Dave.
Yes.
Kevin.
Yes.
Steve.
Yes.
Caleb.
Yes.
Andrew.
Yes.
Okay. Liz.
Yes.
Sarah LaPearl.
Yes.
Okay. And Annie Denny.
Yes.
Okay, the motion passed. Okay, thank you, Chris, for catching that. All right, public comment. Paul Forlenza. Where did you go?
Unmute, Paul.
Oh, Paul, you're muted.
How many times do I have to do that? Sorry. The link, I'm Lenza with the Lincoln Select Board. The Lincoln Group is happy to make a presentation to you and provide something in writing. We would think we probably need more than 10 minutes to make the presentation. It's probably more on the order of 20 to 30 minutes. So And you can consider that an official request from the Lincoln Select Board.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Herb Olson.
Yeah, thanks, Don. So very interesting meeting. Very encouraged by folks being really engaged in the subject. As I kind of understand it, you're thinking of hiring a consultant to help you with this process. That makes sense to me. Other folks have commented, well, the only really option we have on the table is the option that the district presented back on the 7th. I don't think you know what the options are until you ask for them and until you model them. So if you're going to be soliciting scenarios or options from the community, they're not going to be able to get you all the nuts and bolts in terms of the numbers and staffing and finances. That's going to be dependent on having a model that will allow you to take a look at those various scenarios and try to come to some conclusion. I've been talking to folks like Floyd around, trying to get something like this done. And one of the things he said was, we got to find some common ground. And I couldn't disagree at all, with that perspective. And one of the common grounds has to be, what are the numbers in terms of finances, in terms of staffing? And if you don't get some grounding in that, I think you're going to have a tough job. Steve said, well, we don't have anything else on the table. Well, of course you don't have anything else on the table, Steve. You need to have a model to be able to assess whether or not a particular scenario is viable. So I hope that maybe you can engage the consultant to take in, when you solicit the community for various scenarios, you can engage the consultant and try to put together a model that'll allow you to have some common ground around what the numbers are. And then you can really devote your attention to, well, what is best for our educational system and our students? So I make that pitch. I'd like to hear whether or not that kind of modeling can be anticipated from your consultant. That would be great if it can be. If not, I'd really like to see that done one way or another. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Herb. Okay. I'm not seeing any more hands. Okay. Meeting evaluation. Chris, can you help us?
I can, I think. I apologize, I didn't check it out beforehand, but yes, it works. All right, what was the level of engagement of all board members? High or low?
High.
Was the agenda followed, yes or no? Kind of for the most part until you ran out of time.
Right.
Any comments?
Well, I think you had it right there for the most part until we ran out of time.
All right, does the chair effectively establish the agenda and materials for distribution to the board, yes or no?
Yes.
Any comments? All righty then. Is the chair effective in fostering a professional culture regarding fair and open deliberation, full participation of all members, and ensuring the integrity of the board process? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Any comments?
Just appreciated how it wasn't, there was
some time to really, voice our thoughts since December 7th. And I really appreciate you prioritizing that on the agenda and just letting us kind of air out some thoughts. So thank you so much.
Any other? Sorry, did I cut somebody off?
Nope, I think you're good.
Okay. Other feedback for the chair?
Okay.
None. Okay. What went well with the meeting?
Hearing from Hannah and Bella.
Yes, I would agree.
Good discussion.
Right. What suggestions do you have for ways, excuse me, to improve future meetings? More
receive information as far in advance as possible.
Anything else? All right, that's a wrap.
All right. Okay, it's now 9:36. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Andrew?
Rob
Second.
seconds.
Rob, second. All right. Krista, are you in favor of adjourning?
Yes, ma'am.
Sarah McLean?
Yes.
Kristen Blanchett? Rob?
Yes, thank you.
All right, Dave? Kevin Hansen?
Yes.
Steve Rooney?
Yes, thanks.
Caleb?
In favor.
Okay, Andrew?
Yes.
Liz?
Yes.
Sarah LaPearl?
Yes.
Annie Denny?
Yes.
All right. You have passed it. It is 9:36 and the meeting is over. And thank you for hanging in, everybody.
Thank you.
And for spending the time discussing.
Right.